going to call to order the July 8th meeting of the West Sacramento City Council and Redevelopment Agency. We're going to begin tonight, as we do each week, with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'd like to invite our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight will be led by Mr. John Robinson. The council did meet in closed session this evening to confer with our legal counsel regarding two items of substantial exposure litigation and to discuss existing litigation, Louis versus Ricola, on behalf of the city, with the Eastern Federal District Court number noted in our closed session agenda. And approval to defend in the above litigation was approved by the city council by a 4-0 vote. That we're going to proceed to item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the City Council. As is noted on our agenda, we're not permitted under state law to take any of the issues up that may be brought up under item 1A, but it does provide an important opportunity for a public forum. We ask that anyone wishing to address the council this evening on item 1A or any of the other items to please fill out one of the yellow cards that's available at the entering door and to turn it into the city clerk. In front of the city clerk is a timer that we use to assure that everyone has the opportunity to be heard. And to that end, we ask that all of the testimony be limited to no more than 3 minutes. We also recognize that for a lot of folks, speaking in public can present some amount of anxiety and nervousness. And so we ask that there not be any applause or boos or catcalls or other demonstrations, and that we maintain a civil discourse in the chamber. For each of the agenda items, we'll take the request cards for speaking all the way up to the conclusion of the staff report. Once the staff report is concluded and the council's questions and public testimony has begun, we won't be taking any additional cards. And so if you're intending to speak on any of the agenda items tonight, please fill out the card and turn it into the clerk as soon as possible. All right, with that, we have several requests to speak under item 1A, and the first is by Ben Davis, Jr.
Council members, thank you for the opportunity to address you. I supplied you with an answer to a memorandum that you requested from one of your staff members concerning my issues in last Thursday's agenda package. I hope you received it. I hope you had a chance to review it, though I doubt that, given your busy schedules, you all had a chance to read it cover to cover. I hope you will take a look at it. I will synopsize it because I don't think you probably had a chance to memorize or look at it to any degree. Basically, I want you to understand I appealed this decision denying me a loan from the city to one of your staff members. Your staff member did not really consider the appeal, but just denied it, from what I could tell. No mention of the 5 pages of allegations and facts that I had in my appeal were even mentioned in her denial. And so I appealed her denial to the city manager, and he did basically the same thing. He did not refer to anything that I'd alleged. I didn't know that he even read anything. I could not tell from what your staff did that they had any understanding of the issues I'd brought up. So I asked the city manager if he turned me down to give me the address of the state, which he did. Then I came to you. And what happened from coming to you is that I got a letter from both the supervisor, who did not respond to my appeal except to deny it, and the city manager, both of which refer to numerous challenges to my allegations from staff. Now, these 2 letters I should have received as a result of my appeal. I should not have had to come here to receive them. As it was, I had no idea why my appeal was denied. I did not know that any of the allegations in my appeal were even disputed by staff, so I didn't have a chance to say what I'm saying to you, which is, to the extent that the staff and I disagree about what factually happened in my instance, if you look at the letters from staff to me and from me to staff, it's quite clear what they say does not jive with those letters. They say this or this happened on this or this date. You look at the letter and you say, if that happened on that date, why would you write this letter on this date? If you asked for this at this time, it doesn't make sense that you would ask for this at this time. Yet everything I alleged fits with our correspondence perfectly. Now, you hesitate in what they call micromanaging your staff. You've resisted me asking you to get involved with this, and I respect that a council should not micromanage their staff. But what I'm asking you to do is manage your staff. Your staff does not have an appeal process. They ignored my appeal. They should have gone through it. And to the extent that their staff and I disagreed, they should have looked at the record to see who was supported. Instead, I was denied without even the courtesy of telling me why. I wouldn't have found that out had not come to you. I think it's within your jurisdiction, and you should manage yourself, staff, as opposed to micromanage them. You should suggest to them that at least look into this enough to see what I'm telling you is true, that my situation was never looked into, that to the extent we disagreed with staff, nobody went through any process to determine who is telling the truth.
All right, thank you.
Do I understand correctly that your board is of the opinion that you can't comment on things like this that are brought up at this issue?
We have commented. The council's not permitted or allowed to take up issues that are raised under item 1A.
Just so I know what kind of follow-up to expect, is this it? Given that you don't comment, is that the extent of follow-up, or would I expect to hear something at a later date?
I believe there's been at this stage there's been communications back and forth about the final disposition of the application and the appeal.
So what I can understand from your silence basically is that none of you intend to get involved in this any further at this point.
Yeah, this is not a matter that's scheduled for hearing before the council.
I think we understand each other. I may bring it to your attention again, though I'll give that consideration and find out if there's any response from your staff from the issues that I brought to their attention that are still pending. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. All right, Bill Lowell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell of West Sacramento for the record. I was just wondering, with the narrower West Capitol Avenue streets and the wider sidewalks, what kind of effect is this going to have? I know you can't answer me directly, but I was wondering, it seems like this would make it even harder for these big tractor trailer rigs to make their turns, and ever since they made them so long that they couldn't make a right turn from the right lane, they've been tearing up our signal light poles, as you know well, no doubt know. So I think maybe we should take that into consideration and make the corners so that they would accommodate the wider turning vehicles, and will the longer vehicles be able to pick up and deliver or whatever to our present businesses on West Capitol as they now can. So other than that, why, I wrote another one of my little songs about that late budget, and if you want, I'll sing the first and last verse. Okay? It goes, the old My Fair Lady music, get me to the church on time. So I'm saying, we're getting tired of late budgets. Why are we always in a bind? 'Cause Jarvis Gann's Prop 13, their 2/3 vote kills all the time. And lastly, California needs new system, reversal 2/3 budget line. Majority should rule just like old school, and then we'd have a budget on time. And the legislative secretaries and staff, they enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lowell. I would note, we have, the council earlier this year de-designated West Capitol Avenue as a truck route, which will not address all of the issues with respect to trucking on West Capitol, but it will remove particularly the largest of the trucks that aren't necessary in order to serve the businesses along the avenue directly. Rochelle Redmond.
I've just been informed tonight, I'm here again about that Cummings Way property that was involved in the shooting on May 20th. I talked to code enforcement after I was here, and they stated to me that they have no record of Miss Villanueva calling for code violations. They stated they only have one complaint. They only got one complaint on that property in February of 2009, which was this year. And it was for a room add-on in the back. And I asked, why didn't they code the boats and the car, why they were there? I don't understand the procedure, our code enforcement procedure, when they go out to a property and there's blatant code violations that maybe somebody else did not call on, it was just for a room add-on. But I've been informed tonight, as I came into the room, that that property, there has been action there. I didn't know that as of coming here tonight. And I was told that they never got any calls from Miss Villanueva. She told me she called in October. And I wanted to read the interview the day after the shooting from CBS 13 and the statements where I got this from. CBS 13 said, she called the police on Monday, she called them again on Tuesday, then she called them last night. Yolanda said, I've been calling the cops on those people for a year. CBS 13 said, Yolanda has for a year now, has feuded with her neighbors, accusing them of smoking pot, loitering, and code violations. On Monday, they tried to tow her car. Now, she was here at the council meeting on June 10th, and her own statement, if you play back the tape, she says she called code enforcement many times. She said she started calling in October. They have no record. There's a miscommunication here. We need to get this straightened out, whether she called or not, or what happened to her complaint. They told her somebody passed away. They lost a code enforcement officer, and she said they never got back to her. And further in the agenda, I will be speaking on item 10, a little bit further into this. And by the way, the Rotary Park over there across from Safeway looks really great. The guys were out there working on it, out in the heat, and they trimmed it all up. It looks really nice. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Redmond. All right, that brings us to item 1B, which is council communications. And Simon, are there any reports or other communications this evening? Mr. Johannesson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the Homeless and Poverty Action Coalition met June 26, and that group has been pretty much engaged with the the federal grant that the county is trying to receive for homelessness and relocation. But I would like to point out that the 10-year plan that the Homeless and Poverty Action Coalition is preparing is starting in its wind down phase. And there's three meetings that are open to the public that are coming up that would be good to have additional council people there to talk about this. And this will actually be the last framing of the final report. You all have it in your council packet, but on July 21st at 9 o'clock at DSS in Cottonwood, the conversation is going to be about homeless prevention. Then on August 19th, here at the Civic Center on affordable housing, and the last one is on September 24th in Davis, locations to be determined on homeless services. And then once those are through, then we should expect to receive the actual 10-year plan, and from that point, the discussion will start on what to do about the results. I had the opportunity to attend the State of the Seaports event that was held here at the Galleria. And basically, it was a presentation by the World Trade Center, which is Northern California World Trade Center. We also had John Hummer, who's U.S. Department of Transportation and Maritime Administration. Then also updates from the Port of Oakland, the Port of West Sacramento, and the Port of Stockton. And one of the main issues that came out is both Stockton and West Sacramento are working on developing the Maritime Highway or Marine Highway. And basically, that's going to involve the barging of containers from Oakland to both ports. And so there's Both ports are totally engaged in that, and what that means is that for each barge, you can eliminate about 350 trucks off the highways, and there's the emissions that go along with that, and also the wear and tear and health and safety. So there's push from the federal government as well to develop these corridors. So West Sacramento will be in a good spot to take up some of that business. And then finally, I attended a Brighton Broadway Community Action Group meeting a couple days ago, and the city and that group are preparing for a senior transportation summit sometime later in the year. And that's really a response to probably a top concern of seniors in the city is transportation, how to get from point A to point B. And what it's going to involve is basically a brainstorming and allow the residents to come in for question and answers to try and really see what the issues are as far as senior transportation, kind of talk about what the options are. So more details will come out exactly the time and date of that, but I think it's going to be a good event that we definitely should be promoting. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Johannesson. Other reports? I did travel to Washington, D.C. Monday night for a Tuesday hearing the U.S. Senate's Banking and Urban Affairs Subcommittee on Housing, Transportation, and Community Development invited me to testify on issues around public transportation, transit, economic development, urban revitalization, and climate change, as the Senate this week is beginning its work on developing a climate bill to match the House bill that was passed at the end of last month. And they were very interested in what we've been doing. As you know, our region has a national reputation, actually has an international reputation around the integration of transportation and land use, and also in the translation of smart growth and integrated land use and transportation plans into quantitative carbon and other greenhouse gas metrics as part of AB 32 here locally, but also as a potential model for other regions across the country. So we were asked to testify on behalf of the region about what the federal legislation might look like and whether or not the Senate ought to increase the amount of commitment that's in the climate bill for transit. I also took the opportunity, because it's the same committee that handles the Transportation Act reauthorization, to make a pitch on streetcars more directly and some of the process constraints around the development of streetcars. And I have to say that other witnesses that were there, with the exception of one crazy person from the Cato Institute, backed us up on the streetcar issue and the work that we've been doing. So it was actually a very productive hearing. The extent to which the federal climate stuff provides funding and a programmatic and regulatory system that's built off what we've done in our region, it gives us a real leg up on other regions in the competition for funding and other sorts of things, because we're already ahead. And we already have, through the blueprint and through the MTP, a transportation plan that is likely to pass whatever test, or come pretty close to passing whatever test gets put in place as part of that action. So it was a positive, and as I said, we were invited to submit more detailed information around the streetcar and our own transit issues as well as part of that process. So the testimony was invited on behalf of SACOG. SACOG paid for the trip, not the city. And then I had the opportunity afterwards to meet with the responsible staff in Senators Feinstein and Boxer's offices, and Congressman Thompson and Congresswoman Matsui, about our specific issues around flood protection, and particularly around our proposals for fine-tuning the AR and A99 flood insurance zones. And there were positive conversations. We got some encouragement and some good feedback. There's still a lot of coordination work for this to get done, but there's definitely a path there for it to happen. But I think it was valuable to be there, because it was clear that although there's a receptive ear, that these folks require some constant bringing together to keep focus on what is a small issue, a very small issue nationally, but a very important issue in terms of our ability to deliver the improvements to the levee system that are important to protecting public safety in our community and others like us across the country. So it was a good 24-hour visit to the nation's capital in terms of promoting some of our priorities. The only other one I'd report on is the Capitol Corridor, which is not good. All the performance metrics are up. We've had, in the last 8 days, 3 fatalities on the Capitol Corridor tracks. In each case, they were suicides. I mean, we know from the cameras precisely. We now have cameras on trains precisely for this purpose, and it's clear what's happened, and we're getting more and more copycat suicides as a result. So it's a real problem. There's very little that we can do in that regard. You fence off some of the at-grade crossings and remove others, but folks that really want to put themselves in front of a train are going to find a way. And so it's been a difficult time for a lot of the team and the staff and the riders on the Capitol Corridor, but we're going to continue to look for ways to minimize this, but it remains a continuing challenge. All right, item 1C is appointments to boards and commissions, and we have none of those this evening, so that brings us to the consent agenda, which is items 2 through 4. Are there any items on consent that any member of the council wishes to remove, or any item for separate question or comment? 3. Okay, item 3 is consideration of award of contract to PBM Construction Incorporated for the construction of the Broderick Boat Launching Facility expansion located at 103 4th Street. Mayor Pro Tem Beers.
Yeah, it says this was signed by Steve Paytek. I don't know who he is, but no. The most specific question is that this asks for change order authority up to 20%. Typically, it's 15%. I just wondered why this one was going so high, especially since we've been trying to rein that particular item in.
John Sneed, project manager, council. We asked for 20% because the engineer's estimate on this project was $400,000, and this bid came in significantly lower, so we anticipate that there may be some adjustments upward in that, and that's essentially why we put 20% on the project.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just get concerned if somebody comes in really low and then we subsidize that through contingency actions, whether we're defeating the purpose of it. So I guess I'm not going to be the lone person saying lower this, but I really do believe that we need to keep these items, or the contingency item, very low in order to preserve resources. I would feel better if you said there's something more extraordinary about this, like the boat that you got to remove or something like that, that we couldn't, plan for. But I think it's a good thing that the bid came in low, but then on the other side of it, to ask for more money because it came in low seems counterintuitive to me.
Absolutely. It's just kind of a sign of the times right now where contractors are trying to, what we almost consider buy the bid, come in low and look for items. And
I don't want to reward that, though. I want them to do that. If they come in low, then they need to come in low.
Absolutely. We agree.
Mr. Christoph.
Yeah, I was going to address the same issue, and it's the same issue as Councilmember Beers has, and that is some of these contractors might be lowballing the bid because they know they can come in at the back end and pick it up, and that's not the best process to have. So I just want to make sure that, it's something that we've all looked at over a number of years now, and I like the 10 or 15% contingency. I think that makes a lot of sense, and if they can't hold their feet to the fire on that, well then, when another bid comes up in the future, then, that's something that we as staff in the city remember, and that way there you can start to back away from some of these contractors that are sort of milking the system, so to speak. And the other question is, I didn't see anything about any of the security issues that we know we are going to have over there, because we have significant problems over there to start with. In any of these grant applications or in any of the other things that we're doing, is there a way to plug in some security personnel so that we do not have these ongoing security issues as far as breaking into trucks? I mean, people don't leave their boats there. They don't leave their trailers and things there. They feel very uncomfortable, and especially if it's going to be out in the evening or anything like that. So I was just wondering, is there anything that you have thought of from a security perspective, so that people feel safe and comfortable putting their boats in and out at that location.
It has been a discussion that's come up several times, just like the ones that the Riverwalk did when we built the Riverwalk, when we put in the emergency phone there for security reasons. One of the things that we've talked about is there's new technology out now, and I can't say that it's available to us yet, but there are remote cameras now, and that's that's one of the things that we looked at. And we're looking at some of those things throughout other parts of the city also. But it's not included in this package at this time.
Okay, I understand that. I guess one of the other things too is, since we have a history there, especially in the restrooms and different parts of that whole facility there, are there any thoughts as to having a permanent caretaker? Are there any thoughts to having something like that happen so that, somebody can immediately get on the phone to the proper authorities?
I will say I'm not that familiar with the history in the past, Mr.
Okay.
Christoph, but there was a caretaker there on site at one time.
I remember.
And it didn't work out, so.
Well, times are different today.
Sure.
And so, with free rent and hookup and all the other kinds of things that could be available.
Maybe Mr. Patek could live.
Yeah, right.
It very well could be, and the spot is still there, and it's still set.
But I mean, something like that I'd like to explore, because we're going to put in a state-of-the-art facility, and it is a great boat ramp. And it's going to be better. I mean, when you put, what they want to do here, widen it and put in two of the rails there. I mean, it's going to be better. But I just don't want to have it get torn up.
I agree.
Okay.
Mayor Pro Tem Beers.
Yeah, I had actually made a note on cameras too. I know it's not part of this, but it just seems to me we need to be a little bit more assertive on that issue for that particular facility. There's a lot of public money being invested here. So I really would like to get some feedback in a report to the council on the potential of cameras or something for the boat ramp. I'm not sure what you meant about the technology, but I see cameras all over the frigging place anymore, so I think that we probably could get some cameras if we can find and budget for them.
I mean, personally, I would rather, if we did a 15% contingency, which is more standard from what we've been doing, it's not as though the project would come to a complete halt. If something happened and you required more, you would have to come back to us and explain, and you and the contractor would tell us why you couldn't deliver the project within that 15%. So I personally would rather have a 15% contingency, take that 5%, take that extra 15,000, set it aside to buy the cameras, and try to deal with both of those challenges together, rather than go to a 20% contingency, which is not a precedent I want to set, because we're going to hopefully we'll get a lot of bids like this that are substantially under engineer's estimate. And if we start approving a 20% contingency on all of them, we really are abdicating our responsibility to both set priorities, but also to be accountable ourselves for the spending that gets done. Mr. Johannes?
Yeah, I think I would concur with the security measures as well, but at least get it to the point where it's camera ready. I'm not sure the wireless, if you need additional infrastructure to relay the signal to the ultimate, monitoring station. But while it's in the design phase, it's much simpler and more economical to at least plumb it for that type of thing than as an add-on later on.
Yeah, I support the 15%.
Okay. All right, so then when the motion is made on the consent calendar, which is going to be momentarily, because this is the only item pulled, if it would be for 15% contingency, or you want to set aside 5% for the cameras? Okay.
That's my motion.
Security cameras, or, right, whatever you can buy for that. You'll come back and ask for more, but. Okay, so that's a motion on the consent with that adjustment to item 3. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Beers and seconded by Mr. Christoph. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. Item 5 is public hearing to consider adoption of resolution number 09-51, authorizing collection and requesting inclusion of delinquent charges and penalties for water, sewer, and refuse services on the secured tax roll in the same manner as the general taxes.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Claire Connor. I'm a supervising accountant from the Finance Department. The Finance Department manages the billing for water, sewer, and refuse services. Like all service providers, we have customers with delinquent accounts. Over the last years, we have developed policies, incentive programs to reduce the number of delinquencies. At the end of each fiscal year, we rely on the annual transfer of the delinquent amounts to the property tax bill for collection. The legal process to make this transfer begins at the end of June by mailing a notice to all customers that have a delinquent May balance of at least $85. These notices encourage the property owners to pay their utility charges or contact the billing department if they have any questions or comments. The final step is to hold this public hearing to collect testimony, if any, and request that Council consider approval of the transfer of these delinquent accounts to the property tax roll. Prior to preparing this annual delinquency list, we review unpaid balances monthly and send notification to place liens on properties. During this fiscal year, the primary cause for us to lower the lien amount was the increasing numbers of foreclosures in the city. So far, we have placed about 428,000 delinquent utility liens with the county and have collected and released about 230,000. According to the two-year comparison table provided in the agenda report, there was a decrease of 59 delinquent accounts, but the total delinquent amount was increased by about 111,000. This increase was due to some large unpaid commercial and multifamily accounts. Since the delinquent letters were sent, we have been receiving payments constantly. The total delinquent amount as of today has been reduced to $1,044,000. If any customer are present tonight and would prefer to discuss their account in private, Marjorie Dussault from our utility billing is here in the back of the room to assist you. Tonight, we would like to recommend that the City Council approve this resolution, and we will continue accepting payments through July 31st, and the final list will be generated in early August. Staff in the Finance Department will ensure the final delinquent list submitted to the county will be done in a most accurate and professional manner. With that, I would like to return this item back to you for questions and public hearing.
All right, are there questions at this time? I just have a process one. So have we, I thought there was a point where we determined that we weren't going to publish all the identifying information in the agenda packet. The folks who are on the list have received notices directly from you. And it was a long time ago, but I know 10 or 11 years ago, we said, look, folks who might have missed, for $85, they may have missed one or two of their monthly utility bills, and putting that in an agenda packet that is, available to all of their friends and neighbors and family members was potentially a level of embarrassment that wasn't appropriate. It was not an appropriate level of penalty for missing 1 month of payment. Did we switch at some point back to the idea that we would, and we don't do it for weed abatement any longer either.
Right.
We stopped publishing specific addresses. Did we switch back to this system, or am I mistaken?
Evelyn, go ahead.
We used to have names, I think.
Oh, was it names before? Okay.
That's what it
was, is that we continue to use the parcel
Addresses,
numbers
but
and
not
the
the name.
addresses, but we've taken everyone's names off the
Okay.
list.
Okay, all right, thanks. Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, do we know how many of these are in foreclosure that are bank-owned?
Yes, I do. I did a count for, so far and we noted in our system about 536 properties.
Properties?
Foreclosed.
And how many are on this list?
If they're foreclosed, they're not. If bank-owned, they're not on the list.
Oh, if they're bank-owned, they're not on this list?
Yes. Right there, am I correct?
Yes, all the ones that are bank-owned, they're going on the list also. And what's happening is if a customer actually left town, then, and we're not able to collect it that way, then we do it through a collection agency instead. Okay, but we try to collect as much as we can using the property tax rolls.
Okay. They're just over 16, so it's about a third of these are foreclosed properties?
Most of the ones that are going through foreclosure, that are actually foreclosed, okay, then we're collecting them by the collection agency. But if they're going through the foreclosure process, but they haven't foreclosed yet, then we're collecting them differently because they're still owned by people.
So
Individuals.
if they're going through foreclosure, they're on this list?
Yes.
If they are already
If they're already
foreclosed, then they're not on
foreclosed.
this list, they're going to collection, not
That's
through the
right.
delinquent.
They're
Okay.
going through a collection process. And we actually got a new collection agency this year who is much more successful than the past one.
Well, on the collection agency, though, what percent goes to us and what goes to the bill? What's this?
Half of it goes to them, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it depends on the ages of the account.
The older the age, the more that the
The
collection
highest
agency.
50%.
Yeah.
So out of this million,
That is all going to the property tax rolls, and that's all going to be 100% collectible because we're on the teeter plan.
right, okay. But, what I don't understand on some of these is what would be, it's, rounding off about $80 a month for all three utilities, right?
An average bill is about $85.
Right. So many of these are over $1,000.
That's right, they
So
haven't been
that it's
paying
been
for a
multi-
year.
Well, but they're over a year, that's my point. They're single-family residents, it looks like they're over a year. In terms of dollars, they'd be over a year's worth of payments. So how does that occur?
What's happening is that
So you've got
penalties,
1,087, that wouldn't
If-
be a year. I mean, that would be more than a year, wouldn't it?
different account, if it's a residential account, their normal bill, an average bill is about $85.
Right.
And then plus it would incur penalties and interest over that time period, over a year. And an account, at the end of each year, we'll roll it over to the property tax roll,
Right.
and
It should
then
start
they
out at zero
then they
then.
start over again.
Right.
And the balance begins again on June 1st.
So if it's $1,145.43, which looks like half a page of those, how does that amount on $85 a month?
It could be someone who is not having normal services. They might have more garbage service or.
But they don't pay for a whole year? Literally that.
That's correct. There
It
are
just
some
seems-
people who choose not to pay at all.
Well, then my second question then is on our assessment of penalties. Is the penalty and interest that we charge, does that enough to recover the cost of collection and the cost of the loss of dollars?
Well, we've tried to put in very stiff penalties. I think it's 10% for the first month and.
No, I read that. I just
right.
wondered, do we recover the costs for all the ratepayers, or in a sense, through this process, do the ratepayers have to subsidize the shortfall, the administrative cost, and the loss of the use of the dollars when they should be available? You might not know the answer to that,
well,
but I think we should find that out.
The thing is at 10% of the cost for the first year. I mean, if we were to invest the money, all right now the investment earning rate would be about 2% a year. And so what I'm saying is that all these costs, accumulating all this interest and penalties, will be paid through the teeter plan in December and in April of next
Okay.
year.
So we're going to recover our
We're going to
costs.
recover all the charges that you see on the delinquency list.
But do we recover our cost of having to manage all of these delinquencies and the loss of the dollars? We have over $1 million not available to us for a year, over a year. So that's what I meant. Do we recover that cost?
I would have to say that we do.
Okay.
Mr. Johansson?
Yeah. Getting back to the collection, so 50% is that typical for a collection firm to collect?
In my experience, we've had a number of different agencies work for for us. I remember at one time we had one collection agency that I had worked with that they wanted all the money up front. And the difficult part of that is that they weren't motivated to actually collect on the accounts because we had to prepay for services. And so we actually went to a different kind of process of getting a collection agency that would pay only if they collect. And that's what we are having now. The collection agency that we've had in the past wasn't giving us very good returns. And our losses that we were experiencing were becoming significant. And so in the early part of this fiscal year, actually fiscal year 08-09, we actually went out to bid and got a new collection agency, and they have been providing us excellent return on our funds. I mean, I'm very pleased to see at what rate they are returning our funds. So, you know, usually it's typical that a collection agency only collects on 10 to 15% of the accounts.
And I guess you'd be notified in bankruptcies, right?
Yes, we are.
And so none of these would be in bankruptcy, because usually, from what I've seen, once there's foreclosure and delinquencies like this, bankruptcies usually. We don't really expect them to be any of these accounts to be bankrupt because we've been sending them notices and so forth. However, this very evening, one of the customers that's on the list actually came forward and talked to me and said that he was going through bankruptcy, that he had just filed, and it had just been completed, and we're going to be doing the research to substantiate that information.
All right, thank you, Evelyn.
You're welcome.
All right, thanks, Ms. Connor. So now we'll open the public hearing on item 5. We do have one request to speak. That's by Natasha Nguyen. Has that been resolved?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So does anyone else wish to address the council on item number 5? This one is a special public hearing, so even in the absence of a card, is there anyone that wishes to address the council on item 5? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on item 5 and return it to the council.
Move the item.
All right, it's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Beers and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries unanimously. Item 6 is public hearing and consideration to approve Resolution 09-52, certifying the list of weed abatement charges and assessing affected parcels for the cost of abatement and requesting the charges on the secured tax roll in the same manner as general taxes. Mr. Rizzi.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Jason Rizzi, Fire Department. Here tonight to request you open a public hearing, consider Resolution 0952, certifying the list of weed abatement charges and add those expenses to the tax rolls. With that, I'll take any questions.
Are there any questions for Mr. Rizzi?
Pretty straightforward.
All right. Well, then with that, we'll open the public hearing on item 6. No request to speak on this item, but it is a legal public hearing, so does anyone wish to address the council on this item? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing on item 6 and ask if there is a motion. It's moved by Mr. Johannesson, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Beers. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. Item 7 is public hearing to consider adoption of a program income reuse plan for the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. The city manager has requested that we continue the public hearing to August 5th. Without objection, that will be the order. The hearing is continued to that date. Item 8 is Community Development Block Grant, public hearing for consideration of the 2008-2009 Grantee Performance Report, Resolution 09-43 authorizing an application for 2009 CDBG General Allocation Funding, and Resolution 09-56 authorizing matching funds for the grant. Ms. Collis?
Thank you. This evening, we're here to ask the City Council to hold a public hearing as required by the Community Development Block Grant, or known as CDBG program. Public hearings are required before the city can submit its annual grantee performance report each year by the end of July, and also when the city is considering submitting an application for new funding. Those are the two items we'll be discussing this evening. First of all, for fiscal year 2008-2009, included in the staff report is a copy of the grantee performance report. This gives an overview of accomplishments that the city has completed during the last fiscal year with CDBG funded activities. And I want to let you know that I apologize. There were a couple of blanks in one of those items, so we did not get the final version printed, so I apologize for that. We received a grant actually it was a 2005 grant, but it's grant 04 STBG 1972. The city has purchased and cleared property along West Capitol Avenue next to at 1725 West Capitol Avenue. That property has hazardous substances, so testing has been completed and abatement is underway. The first-time homebuyer program has completed 3 loans from this grant in the past year, but it should be noted that we also have home funds in addition to CDBG funds for the first-time homebuyer program, so the city's actually completed 7 first-time homebuyer loans this year. We've been using the small amount of CDBG owner-occupied rehab money in this grant to do a number of grants to mobile home owners for mobile home repair. So we've done 17 mobile home rehab grants this year, in addition to 4 stick-built homes that were rehabbed with home funds. So that's 21 housing rehab jobs, primarily in the north side of town, the Brighton Broderick area. We recently received a new grant for owner-occupied rehab. That one's just getting underway. We've done the environmental review and we've begun marketing the funds. The grant also includes funding for the Parkside City Center project just down the way on West Capitol Avenue, and for the infrastructure, and that construction is underway. And it includes a small amount of money from the Mobile Home Park Improvement Program. This will be the first funding we've had for the program, and we have received a great deal of response from park owners who are asking to apply for loans. These are our forgivable loans that would allow them to upgrade the infrastructure of their parks. So we're very encouraged by that. We've got the guidelines, and we are working on some environmental reviews, and then we will be processing applications. The next 2 sections are the ones with the blanks. The loan that the city provided to United Bakery has created 10 jobs to date, and we expect at least another 25 to 30 coming over the next year as they ramp up to full production. The loan last year to Portside Montessori Preschool produced 5 jobs this year, which is a total of 8 for the preschool. So that was 8 jobs for a $60,000 loan. The council has made comments in the past that one job for $35,000 is maybe not the best use of funds, but so far we're seeing a much higher ratio of jobs to dollars on our loans. We have a number of open planning and technical assistance grants. These are not reported in the grantee performance report, but they're included in your staff report for the council's information. As Councilman Johannesson noted, the homeless 10-year plan is underway with a CDBG grant, and we expect to have a draft by the end of September. We have completed a housing conditions survey of single-family homes in our older neighborhoods. That was in conjunction with a amendment to or a revision to the city's housing element last year, and now we're working on a multifamily housing conditions survey. We have a bid out, an RFP bid out for a restaurant retention and attraction study that we're very excited about to try and bring some venues to our downtown area primarily. It's limited to West Capitol Avenue and the Washington area. So we're really looking forward to getting that underway. And finally, we just received the grant agreements for a study of nonprofit mobile home park feasibility and the development of a Brighton Broderick strategy. So those will be underway very soon. Do you have any questions on the grantee performance report?
I have one.
Mr. Kristoff.
Luis, on the restaurant part of that, is there a way that we can expand the West Capitol Avenue or the Washington Neighborhood Group and take it down Harbor Boulevard. And the reason I say that is because the city now owns Baker Square. And so, I mean, I think that I would really like to try to market that so that we can put a restaurant back at that site. Because Baker Square really didn't leave for financial reasons as far as not enough customers and everything. It was another issue that happened at corporate. But, so I would really like to explore maybe expanding that. Is there a way to expand that a little bit so that they can receive some of the funding or some of the?
Well, it sounds like you're talking about marketing rather than a study. So that was not really within the scope of the application. However, I would expect that a lot of the information that we collect and a lot of the people that we talk to, restaurateurs and restaurant financing institutions, will probably be making some good contacts for that. To expand to that location and do a specific study on that location, we would have to go to the state and amend our grant agreement, and I'm not sure that that would be something that they would consider. I can call and ask them, though. I can certainly ask them.
I just thought it was advantageous because it's city property, and I'm sure that in order to get a restaurant there, you know, we could probably put a very, very good lease together for a restaurateur. Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
And I understand Mr. Patek has an application to open a restaurant. Mr. Johannesson, I'm going to get him into every item tonight.
Yeah, Louise, on the restaurant issue too, I would also, if you haven't, to make sure you contact the California Restaurant Association. They're in Sacramento. I've had a couple conversations with them about restaurants in the area and what can and can't, at least from their view, happen in West Sacramento. But they've got a wealth of information on, you know, attraction and retention ideas. I think they're just finishing up in Sacramento. I think it's called the Grape Escape or something along that line, as a way to promote the restaurants in Sacramento. But it would be definitely worth the effort to contact them in preparing the study.
Okay, I'll make sure that's on the list.
Member Pro Tem Beers.
Actually, Louise, just a comment. I was very pleased with this list of accomplishments. You know, I know each one of these individually represents a lot of individual staff work, and these are sometimes not the most glorious projects that the city has, but these collectively show a lot of effort. So you guys have been doing a good job.
I'll pass that along to my coworkers. Thank you.
The Parkside at City Center infrastructure project, which is noted in here, have we gotten official word? I know the state committee that reviews Prop 1C applications last week approved $1 million or recommended $1 million be allocated to that project.
I believe, Paul, I believe we got that contract?
Yeah, I believe $1.9 million was approved for that project.
It's approved. Okay.
All right.
No contract yet.
Very good. Okay. On to the next half.
Okay, next up is submission of a 2009 general allocation funding application. Applications are being taken right now for funding for general allocation items. General allocation funding can be used for community facilities. It can be used for public works projects. However, HCD does limit those generally to extreme health and safety need or infrastructure for affordable housing. Public services are also eligible, and housing-related programs and projects. The city may apply for up to $800,000 this year, and that application can consist of one or two programs of up to $400,000 each, or we can combine one program of up to $400,000 and one project, or the city could apply for one or two projects not to exceed $800,000. This year, the state is providing bonus points for projects that include energy efficiency improvements and also to housing infrastructure projects. So those are the types of projects that we are recommending. We understand it's going to be a very competitive funding application round, and therefore we have, we looked for projects and programs that would score the best. First of all, we recommend a request of $411,407 for off-site infrastructure supporting the Bridge District Affordable Housing Project. That's going to be constructed over on South River Road, right down the street from Rayleigh Field. And the grant would cover the developer's required costs for curbs, gutter, sidewalk, landscaping, sewer, striping, traffic lights, water lines, and storm drains. The project will provide 70 units of housing affordable to persons at 50% or below of median income. Those are CDBG terms, that's very low income. Secondly, would be a request for $308,593 for single-family rehabilitation to continue our owner-occupied rehab program. This gets points because our owner-occupied rehab program does provide energy efficiency upgrades to the homes, and so that, and it's all homes are rehab that belong to households that are CDBG income eligible, so that's also scores quite well. And finally, the city can apply for up to 10% of a grant to an activity that is not rated and ranked, and so this is an opportunity for us to provide funding for projects that don't necessarily get us bonus points, but don't hurt us when we put them in. And as I said earlier, we've had great response to our first initial amount of funding for the mobile home park improvement program, and so we're recommending 10% of the grant be used to replenish that fund. That would be another $80,000 for the mobile home park improvement program. That concludes my presentation.
Mayor Pro Tem Pierce.
Louise, I just have a question. You said that you can ask for 400,000, but on one of them we're asking for 411. Do they allow for contingencies?
400,000 for a program, but projects are not limited.
Not limited?
Don't
Okay.
have that limit.
All right.
So if we were an entitlement city, how would this change? Would we be submitting all of this, or some of this, or none of it?
If we were an entitlement city, we might prioritize things differently because we would just look at city priorities and not necessarily fund things that, number one, serve 100% low-income persons. CDBG funds can be used for activities that they have to serve primarily low income, but if there's,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean substantively, but just procedurally. If we were an entitlement city, we wouldn't have to submit any of these to the state? We would just get an allocation?
The city would have, we would just get an application from HUD. We would be required to submit an action plan directly to HUD stating what our activities are, and then once that's approved, we'd be ready to go.
All right, because we're going to be convening a complete count for the Census Committee here soon under the Census Bureau's work, and just it's one of those little incentives that if we just got to that magic number, 50,000, it would mean a lot of this, and the environmental block grant's the same thing. Would mean a lot in terms of our local discretion to be able to set our own priorities for things like this. Because just as an example, the state, as you said, is giving extra points, and it happens to match with what we're doing in the Bridge District this year, but extra points for stuff that produces additional housing. Which isn't really frankly, shouldn't be a priority anywhere in the state at the moment, given the amount of foreclosed and vacant properties. But it might not be as priority that we would set here locally. We might decide that there are other ways for us to use these dollars to achieve the kind of community development and social opportunity objectives of CDBG that we can't do because we're trying to match some requirements that have been set at the state level. So I'm just trying to build the case for us to make sure that we count every single resident of the city and try to hit 50,000 as soon as we can so we can take better control of our destiny. Okay, thanks. Any other questions before we open the public hearing? All right, seeing none, then we'll open the public hearing on item 8, and we have no requests to speak. Mr. Lowell? Again, this is a statutory public hearing, which is why we'll take these without the cards, but I'm just warning folks when we get to items 9 and 10 and the others, that we need to have the cards by the conclusion of the staff report. We won't have this kind of procedure where you can come up in the middle of the public hearing just at the last moment. So, Mr. Lowell, welcome.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I hadn't had a chance to read.
Oh, you're fine. No, this one is totally appropriate, Mr. Lowell. Welcome.
Anyway, let's see. I was just thinking regarding the Baker Square place and other businesses, including the post office and Department of Water Resources, and the new housing there on South River Road. I was wondering about the frequency and the nearness of bus stops and so forth. And I think that number 211, which only runs during peak hours for our industrial area, once again, I think we're getting close to that point to where the service should be improved from just peak hour to at least every other hour or bi-hourly service to accommodate all those jobs going begging and all those people that don't have other access to and from the job. And therefore, we would have better connectivity between the job seekers and the jobs that are available. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. All right, so with that, we'll close the public hearing on item 8. Anything? I was going to ask Ms. Collis if there's any. Oh, there she is. Is there anything further?
Move it.
All right, it's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Beers and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. That brings us to item 9, which is a public hearing on urgency interim ordinance 09-14, making findings and establishing a temporary moratorium on medical marijuana dispensaries in the city of West Sacramento. Mr. Ricola.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. This item is to consider adoption of interim ordinance 09-14, which would set a 45-day moratorium on the establishment of medical marijuana dispensaries in the city. If enacted tonight, it would run until the 22nd of August. However, state law also allows the city to extend the ordinance up to an additional 22 months and 15 days after a notice public hearing. Tonight's ordinance is not an effort to ban medical marijuana dispensaries, but only to allow sufficient time for investigation of the proper way to handle the use. The proposed ordinance before you tonight is in your staff report as attachment 1. If you look on page 3 of the draft ordinance, you will see that there are 7 specific findings being made. I will speak to 4 of them, and Lieutenant Dave Delaney of the Police Department is available tonight to answer questions that may relate to law enforcement issues on the other findings. There are no medical marijuana dispensaries currently, or have there ever been any medical marijuana dispensaries operating in the city. In the last few months, however, the city has received several inquiries from members of the public relating to the permitting process and zoning regulations for operating medical marijuana dispensaries. In addition, the city has received 1 application for establishment of a medical marijuana dispensary, which is currently incomplete, and the city also has received correspondence regarding an application at an unspecified location within the city. Now, when a proposed use is not identified in the city's zoning ordinance, unless it is otherwise prohibited, it's a conditional use and, of course, requires approval by the Planning Commission. A medical marijuana dispensary is such a use. In addition, the city does not have any standards in the zoning ordinance relating to the location, operation, and relative concentration of medical marijuana dispensaries. If a medical marijuana dispensary were allowed to be permitted without appropriate review of location and operational criteria and standards, such use would result in a number of issues. The use could be incompatible with surrounding land uses, such as a school, a church, a daycare center, and other uses. It might be established in areas that might be in direct conflict with the city's general plan, one of our specific plans, and zoning code revisions currently under review by the city. Finally, it could have potential adverse secondary effects on neighborhoods and be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare. As the council is aware, the city has been involved in an update of its general plan for over the last 2 years, permitting a marijuana dispensary to open while the city is studying, considering revisions to the general plan and zoning regulations to prohibit or regulate this use would defeat the purpose of studying these impacts in the first place. Staff's recommendation is summarized in the first page of the staff report. Both Mr. Delaney and I are available to answer any questions that you may have regarding the proposed ordinance.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ricola. Are there questions from members of the council at this time?
Oh, he wasn't going to make a presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's the second half of the presentation?
No, sir, I believe
Okay,
in the
just-
interest of time, we've done just this portion with Mr. Ricola, and I'm available for any questions that anyone has regarding law enforcement perspective.
Thank you. All right, seeing none, then we will, we have several requests to speak on our item 9, and the first is by Joel Marsall. Marsall?
Hi, I am Joe Marcel, and I am one of those licenses that you're talking about. Like what we are doing elsewhere in the town of Ileton, say, or in the town of Morgan Hill, where we also have this exact same thing going on with York, I would guess that the other councils, we are about to have a bunch of workshops. We are also about to provide them with all of the guidelines, all of the rules, because most don't know what these things are. Like in the town of Morgan Hill, we were asked to have them located by the hospital or in that type of an environment. Up in the town of Ileton, we are actually going to take your up there. We are going to take the chief of the police department out to these dispensaries so that they can actually look and see what these things are. What we would like to do is present our team's approach to best practices and some examples and the information that you might need so that all of the choices that you make are always based on the facts and also the guidelines that I also attach to our application. So we would make ourselves obviously available to all of that. And I have these copies that I can leave you. State of California Attorney General. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marsall. Sam Latino?
Hello, my name's Sam Latino. I'm from Sacramento. I come here today to support this. I think time is of the essence here for the sick patients that are out there right now, because my stepdad was kept alive for 2.5 years with medical marijuana. He acquired cancer at an age of about 85 or 80, somewhere in there, and he was actually dying in the hospital. And I was able to bring him some medical marijuana in a tablet form. He was able to get his appetite back and be able to come back home and live 2.5 years. He was actually dying in the hospital. They pronounced him to be dead in about a week and a half. He was gurgling. He had pneumonia in his lungs. Without the cannabis, he was dead. He was losing weight every day. The gentleman was a big gentleman. He was down to 110 pounds. Every day he was losing weight. He couldn't get out of bed. It just got worse and worse and worse, the nausea, et cetera, et cetera. The cannabis saved his life, kept him alive 2.5 years. There's people that need this now. The delivery service needs to be put in place immediately. It doesn't need a storefront. It can be put in place immediately, not disturb any of this. I think to help you guys out a little bit, what Joe was saying there, we've done a lot of work. Santa Barbara has their ordinances in place already. They're welcoming dispensaries there. you may want to get a copy of their ordinances and just do a cookie cut on theirs. That'd probably be an easy lap right there. There's over 1,000 dispensaries in California. We'd be just one of the many here that is now legal and open. I would just like to see you guys support this and be very open-minded to it. Block out the 70s, the potheads, the hippies, the whole thing that comes to mind when you first picture a marijuana plant. No, that's not the issue. There's sick people, they're hurting, they're dying, they need this medication. The doctors have gave them every type of medication you can give with all the side effects that come with all the medication that they make in the labs. And this is one of the only medications that can save and help a lot of people. And I really, really think you need to take a good look at that. If you visit our website, which is CalCan Center, that's CalCann Center.com, we have a lot of information in there. You'll learn a whole bunch just taking a little roll through our website. And I appreciate your time. And just be open-minded, that's all. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Dan Saniqua? Oh, Senna, okay. You're up. Welcome.
Thank you for giving us a chance to speak here tonight. My name is Dan Senna. I was a local West Sac boy for a while, operating a handicapped bathroom business on Del Monte next to the Jazz Jubilee office for quite a few years. Hence, moved to Sacramento and built a store there, and I'd like to find a way to come back to Sacramento, back to West Sacramento. But the medical marijuana, I've kind of approached it from a different business standpoint, and I've done a lot of research myself in finding out exactly what it's all about in terms of the medical side of it and maintaining a professional business side of it. My background is as a consultant for McDonald's Corporation at one time with Ray Kroc back in Chicago, so I kind of look at things that way. And that's why the expansion that we're talking about in Gilroy and some of the other counties and councils that we've met with, we've actually covered a lot of territory with a lot of folks that are looking for economic relief, trying to find other businesses and opportunities to bring into communities. So the approach I would give is one that we're taking in Sacramento, and that is, in Oakland, there's a university called Oaksterdam University. It's been there for about 4 years. They're educating people every weekend, every day about the whole process, and they charge a tuition to do that. And they educate them from the legal side, the medical side, how to run a dispensary, how to operate a dispensary, how to be an employee in a dispensary, and how to grow the product in medicine as well. We've got the licensing, we're negotiating the licensing agreement to bring one of those schools to Sacramento as well. We're going to have satellite schools in our other dispensaries as we open them up across the country to funnel them towards the main university that depending on the demographics, we will locate them, accordingly. So that's kind of the way we approach it, because it's all about education too as well. So the school is a big component besides the dispensary for the obvious reason, because there is people medically that do need the medication as well. Besides that, there's other industries that go with it. So when you think of dispensary, there's probably 9 to 10 other businesses that actually complement it as well. So there's a lot to look at. And when you do go to the website for CalCan, you'll see a collection of those businesses that we think complement it and enhance the value of it in the education process, as well as the tax base. Because if you do a little research on the Oaksterdam University concept, you'll find that they're paying some sort of special reserve tax to the city of Oakland. I believe it's 1.8% that they pay. It's some special revenue tax that's developed in the process. And that seems to be helping the communities as well. So again, we approach it from that standpoint. We're happy for any feedback that we can get, and if anybody wants to meet with us and consult with us as well to give information on facts and figures and how we see it and perceive it in the community, we'll be happy to do that. Okay? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Lynette Davies?
Hello. I'm Lynette Davies with Americans for Safe Access and out of Sacramento, and I do a lot of the education in the city of Sacramento right now. And I came today to actually support your moratorium because that's a step in the right direction. As you're trying to place the rules and regulations, the same thing that we're doing all the way across the state. And we are in the process of working with Sacramento City and Sacramento County. The city, you might even want to get a hold of their city manager, as Gus Vina is working on the project. He is actually heading it there, and Gus Martinez, the two Gus's. And we're looking at doing the same thing in Sacramento. We have been successful in Sacramento having open dispensaries, or we call them dispensing collectives. And they have been here for years. And you might say, well, why don't we just have our people go across the city or across the bridge? And then one of the reasons you wouldn't want to do that is you want to keep your base here. And when people are ill, you also want to be able to provide them a safe and affordable access in their own home place. So cities should have an open area where somebody feels safe and comfortable using an alternative medicine. So what I would suggest, instead of looking at it as a full legalization type of thing, take a look and say, where do we have our acupuncture places? Where do we have our chiropractors? Where do we have other related industries that for natural herbs? Chinese, a lot of Chinese people will have natural herb stores for their alternative medicines. So these are things that could be directed with your city, that instead of having an open door policy where you may have 100 dispensaries on every corner, you can regulate, you can set your rules. And since we're already setting a lot of these rules and regulations up in Sacramento, you can borrow ours, and we can line these things up so that they're done correctly. Because we do want to see that the patients have safe and affordable access, but we want to make sure that everybody is safe and affordable too. We want our communities safe, we want our public safe, we want to be an asset. We don't want to be looked at as a liability. And you'll find also that one of the main concerns when you open up a dispensary is, what about the kids? Kids need to be taught that people are sick, and that the people that are coming in or out of a dispensary and collective are ill people. These are not people that are going out there to get high. These are not people that are going into a bar. And they're not a dredge to society. So I think it's a matter of education. And one of the things that I do in Sacramento is I teach twice a month at least. It's an hour-long open meeting where I do work on educating the public. And I'd be glad to do something here if you so need it. But I want to thank you for your time. Okay.
Ms. Davies, thank you. Nathan Sands?
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Thank you for hearing this important issue. My name is Nathan Sands. I am a West Sacramento resident and homeowner and medical marijuana patient. But I also, in my volunteer life, represent the Compassionate Coalition, a nonprofit patients' rights organization that defends the rights of medical marijuana patients. And I have served on the Sacramento County Task Force on Medical Marijuana Dispensaries, as well as working with dozens of cities and counties throughout the region. And so I hope I can bring some of that experience to help in this process. We'll be here from beginning to end. And if the city does need a moratorium to take the time to look at this issue, we feel that is appropriate, and we'd like to help in what follows. I'd like to say, first of all, though, that to make clear that the city doesn't have the right to ban medical marijuana dispensaries. I'm glad that's not really on the table here. They do have the right to regulate them, to zone them, to keep them out of residential districts. And so we hope that we can bring some of that experience in. The staff report mentions that other cities have banned them, such as Folsom, and I was there, and there were actually other reasons. They were able to ban it because no citizens showed up saying they wanted it. So that is an entirely different legal argument. But here we do have citizens saying we do want dispensaries in our city, collectives as they should properly be called. And we can say that other cities such as Elk Grove and Citrus Heights do have ordinances in place that would regulate dispensaries, and there haven't been any problems there. But lastly, I'd like to say that if you're going to take the time to enact this moratorium to look at the issue, do that. This report actually says right here that dispensaries cause crime. But there's no facts, no information, and we've seen kind of the supposed facts that are emailed around by the the California Narcotics Officers Association and so on, and it's really hearsay and doesn't actually have a factual basis. So if you're going to say right in the ordinance that dispensaries cause crime, I think you're kind of putting the cart before the horse. You're saying we don't need to examine the issue. We already know that they do. And I would say that a poorly run dispensary can increase crime or have other problems, but the well-run dispensary tends to decrease crime. There tends to be video cameras on the outside of the area, which often reduces, auto thefts and other problems like that in the region. So this can be done well, and we hope that we can help you and answer any questions that come up in this process. Thank
Mr. Chance, have you visited our neighbors in Davis and to look at their existing ordinance?
Yeah, I
Which
work
had
in
understood
Davis, and I
an
was
out-
there. They actually have a ban in Davis. And again, someone asked for a permit and then never showed up to the meetings to say they wanted it, and it kind of went downhill from there. But those bans will actually be overturned in time.
All right, thank you. Mr. Lowell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell, West Sacramento, for the record. My sympathies are with those cancer patients who seem to benefit from some use of medical marijuana, but I have also read in recent issues of the paper where secondhand marijuana smoke can cause cancer. Well, if that's true, well, I think we should take an even harder look at smoking at bus stops and in bus shelters. And I don't think to wait on a bus at a shelter or on a bench, whatever, I don't think we should be subjected to secondhand marijuana smoke any more than we should be subjected to secondhand cigarette or cigar or pipe smoke. And so I think that should be considered in the overall picture. But yeah, we can. I think we should restrict it. But hey, we see all the time about people robbing these little convenience stores of cigarettes and so forth. Well, so you can say cigarettes cause crime too. So just have to balance it out and hope that maybe medical marijuana is not the first step to those more serious drugs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. And Peter Kais.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. My name is Peter Kais. I'm a longtime resident of Sacramento. I'm representing medicalmarijuanaofamerica.com. We are an educational group, not a dispensary. And I'm here to encourage you to permit and regulate dispensaries. I support your moratorium if the intent is to allow rather than prohibit dispensaries. I'm going to keep this really brief in response to one thing I heard from the report. I think you can and will be successful limiting your proximity to schools, but I think you will be less successful trying to limit your proximity to churches. And what you will find, in fact, is that many people of faith actually dispense medical marijuana from their churches. Anyway, thank you for hearing this very important issue, and hope you do the right compassionate thing.
All right, thank you. All right, that concludes the public comment, so we'll return to staff for any further clarification or responses to the comments.
Mr. Mayor, could I ask you to put one thing in the record? Part of the staff's recommendation here is based on a April 2009 white paper, discusses some of the reasons why it's important to have the moratorium and supports the findings. So if I could just have the record reflect that white paper.
What is this white paper?
You have six findings you're making. And part of the staff's discussion with you and part of the presentation of the staff report is based on this white paper, and we just want to make sure it's in the record in support of the moratorium.
I'm sorry, do we have the white paper?
You don't have it there. I have a copy in front of me. The staff has it.
Can we get it?
Absolutely.
I would like, if it's going to be in the record, I would like to
Absolutely.
be able to see it before we take final action. So if we can get it copied before, I don't know if other members of the council are interested, but I'd like to see it. Okay. Mr. Ricola? Oh, thanks.
Just a couple brief comments. I think we were delighted at the cooperative spirit that we saw expressed by nearly all the speakers tonight and their willingness to cooperate with the city in our effort at looking at this issue. I do, however, in talking to Mr. Delaney, I think there is one issue we would like to address regarding the crime issue.
Just in relation to crime surrounding medicinal marijuana dispensaries, there's medicinal marijuana obviously is passed in the state of California, and under the state law, it's not a crime for possession. And of course, it also goes out to the people that need this drug. But our concerns are mainly with the crimes that surrounds kind of a secondary impact to these types of establishments. And those crimes would be the diversion of marijuana to non-qualified patients, and then the disreputable businesses that would dispense other types of drugs, i.e. cocaine and things like that from the establishment. The experience in Sacramento is that these, my understanding in speaking with some of the narcotics agents over there, is that these types of establishments experience a higher frequency of robberies than other types of establishments. So that's a concern. And then in speaking with the DEA, it's not uncommon for dispensary type organizations to also be involved in money laundering, disreputable ones, I should say. So those are the things that we're really probably for the main secondary impacts that we're concerned about, that we feel needs further exploration before we dive into allowing them.
All right, and we'll return to the council for questions and discussion. Mayor Pro Tem Beers?
Well, my question is to this report, is this a public document? So is the staff report then, the 6 items, are these a summary of the issues identified in the paper?
That and other material that's available public, and it's just if there is a concern about any of those findings, we want you to know, and for the record to show, there's a basis for those findings for the moratorium only, not any ultimate conclusions.
Right, okay.
I mean, I did have a question with respect to the findings, because finding 1 and finding 7 are, they're declaratory as to the negative impacts that you know, in finding 1, it says California cities that have permitted these establishments have found that such dispensaries have resulted in negative effects, so on and so forth. I mean, I think the record shows that some cities, many cities, maybe most cities have found some or all of these effects, but there's not a tight one-to-one correspondence. I mean, there are also cities that have not reported significant negative effects, and they may be in the minority. And then in number 7, it's sort of the same issue. It says there's a result of the negative, harmful, and secondary effects. It doesn't say that may be associated with them. It's just it attaches those effects by definition to the dispensaries. And part of the challenge we're facing definitionally here is that precisely because very few cities have adopted regulatory frameworks, you know, we're trying to examine the record of dispensaries in a largely unregulated environment. In many cases, dispensaries that were operating, you know, illegally, without both in the federal context, but also not getting the appropriate conditional use permits in their own communities. So cities have had bad experiences with those, and we're extrapolating those bad experiences to what might occur if we actually were to adopt a regulatory framework. And I don't think that's not a fair leap, but it doesn't wipe away the negative effects that are there, that have been reported in some or most cities. But I do think we shouldn't overstate the conclusion in the findings as you know, more than is necessary to make the moratorium be appropriate. Because, you know, one of the other issues, Los Angeles is a home for so many, 500 or 600 of these dispensaries in LA alone. All of which all but a dozen of which have been opened under a moratorium, so under virtually no regulation at all by their local government, and that's got to create a lot of bad actors, maybe 500 of them, and so you would expect, at least I would expect to see, you know, if we were to go out and assess those or look at the statistics, that they would be uniformly bad. So I just want to be careful, because these are exactly the issues the moratorium is appropriate for, so that we can start looking at them in a more complete and serious way. But I do think we should be careful not to prejudge the outcome completely before we get a chance to see.
I might suggest some language to you. Number one, for example, Mr. Mayor, it would be very easy, I think you just used the words yourself, some California cities that have permitted the establishment of medical marijuana dispensaries found that such studies may have resulted in. I think that's the conclusion that is in there, and I agree that it isn't 100% in anywhere, or totally conclusory.
I think you only need one of those clarifiers. I think some is good enough. Some have reported that it has happened. I don't think you need the may after that.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't want to.
And then on number 7, I think you could say because of the potential for the things that are stated there.
Right.
Okay. Good. Very good. Thanks. Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, I would just consider, so, Mr. Murphy, with those language changes, we have sufficient findings for a moratorium?
Yes.
Okay.
Further discussion? Mr. Christoph?
Let's see. Would recommend that the City Council adopt Ordinance 09-14, establishing a 45-day moratorium on marijuana dispensaries, and find that the ordinance is not subject to SEQA pursuant to Section 15060 C2.
Second that, if it includes the amended language.
And with the amended language as far as the white paper is concerned.
All right, that has been moved and seconded. Mr. Murphy?
Roll call.
And we will take a roll call. I actually did have comments. I thought Mr. Christoph had something to say about it when I called. Because as we proceed with the moratorium, I mean, I think the staff board identifies many of the issues that we've got to take a look at. The environment has changed, obviously, with the announcement by the Attorney General. That's not really incorporated in the Cal Chief's report about the change in the federal policy or practice with respect to how they're going to be approaching these issues. So that's obviously, the staff report doesn't note that. The staff report sort of essentially refers to DEA policy and practices, but doesn't note the change that the Attorney General has announced, that they're not intending to prosecute in this particular, fairly narrow sphere. So hopefully the moratorium will give us a little bit of time to figure out exactly what that means, because we still have conflicts, and our local district attorney, has a different view, and we're going to have to sort all those things through as well. The challenges for us as a region, we have to face too. That we're not in this by ourselves, and we don't know yet what the Sacramento City and/or county ordinances are going to look like. We do have a challenge in Yolo County. If the rest of Yolo County's jurisdictions have all adopted ordinances prohibiting the dispensaries, we do not want to be the sole supplier in the region or even in our sub-region. And so that's one of the one of the things that we're going to need to be taking a look at during this period is exactly how how we regulate the numbers and the practice. So if we decide to proceed with an environment that permits any of these dispensaries, that it's proportional to what the need here is locally. If that were to occur, I'm interested in the the taxation issues, which weren't raised tonight. I've gotten plenty of emails on this issue. So the city will make a lot of money if you have these dispensaries. I hope not, because the only way you make a lot of money on sales taxes if there is a huge amount of business being conducted, and the issue that's been the reason this is before us is because of the issues around health care for folks and pain management for folks who are in severe need, and so we are not expecting or hoping that there'll be tens of thousands of people taking advantage of these services, generating enough sales tax for it to be a revenue generator. Oakland is a different case. Oakland is going to the voters this fall, asking them to adopt a fairly hefty tax on dispensaries, but we don't have even a gross receipts tax here that Oakland has, even at the current level, so that's not really an option for us.
Yeah, but we may be able to get into the business license issue and then take it to the voters as far as Prop 218 is concerned.
We could do as I understand it.
I'd just as soon have the people vote on this thing too.
The Oakland,
I think it's important.
The Oakland measure is, I think, consistent with the powers of a general law. I looked at it. I didn't see anything that looked like it was specific to a charter city, so it may be within our scope. The other issue is the one that Mr. Lowell raised, which is, I know there are restrictions in the state law around where, once you purchase medical marijuana, where there are, it seems like a very small number of places that you're not allowed to smoke it or consume it. That is anywhere where smoking is not allowed, or within 1,000 feet of school grounds, on a school bus, while in a motor vehicle, or while operating a boat. So, I mean, I think the issues that Mr. Lowell raised, I think smoking is already prohibited on the bus itself, but not at bus stops, at least not yet. We're working on that. But that's another issue I think we'll want to, in parks and other public places, I think if as a moratorium goes forward, that we ought to look at our authority to be able to regulate that as well. So for me, at least, in addition to the issues that you've raised in the staff report, I think those are the kinds of things that we ought to be using the moratorium period to examine. All right, so we have a motion before us. If there's no further discussion, this, because it requires a 4/5 vote of the council, and there are only 4/5 of the city council present, requires a roll call vote. Madam Clerk, if you would.
Mayor Cabalden?
Yes?
Councilmember Johannesson?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Beers?
Yes.
Councilmember Kristoff?
Yes.
All right, that motion carries 4-0. Thank you. That brings us to item 10, which is presentation, discussion, and first reading of 09-8, amending Chapter 19.20 of the city's municipal code relating to administrative citations. Chief Drummond?
This is going to be a very interesting item if you'd like to stay and Code Enforcement's coming before you tonight with a two-part presentation. The first part is actually an amendment to the existing administrative citation process that Code Enforcement uses, has to do with the payment of fees. So that'll be the first part that Larry presents. And then we thought we'd take the opportunity to present to you an overview of the Code Enforcement program and kind of a report. And we haven't done that since I think Larry's been here as the Code Enforcement Manager. We've come to you with specific issues, but this is a chance to look at the program globally. So that'll be the second part of the presentation. So Larry Brooks, Code Enforcement Manager, will be making that. Larry.
Thank you. With regards to the council report presentation, discussion, and first reading of ordinance 09-8, amending Chapter 19.20 of the municipal code related to administrative citations. This particular code with regards to administrative citations is already on the books. And when I came here and I saw it, I talked with our city attorney's office about how could we utilize it as just an additional tool in motivating code violators to come into compliance as it is used in other cities throughout the region. What I was advised to do is two things by our city council, by our city attorney, which was first come to the city council with a schedule of fees for an administrative citation. Our finance department did that for me in December, and the city council approved the schedule of fees. The other thing that our city attorney recommended that I do is amend the ordinance to address the appeal process. Currently, anytime we notice someone with violations, they're allowed to appeal first, pay fees later. In this particular instance, under certain circumstances, when we feel that it is appropriate to administer an administrative citation, and by that I mean under our ordinance, it clearly defines when we can and cannot do an administrative citation. So what we're asking is, under those situations where we can write an administrative citation, what we would like to do is have the individual pay their fee first, and then they can appeal. Otherwise, as you can see in the report, the thought is by our city attorney is that it's not going to be able to do what the administrative citation is intended to do, which is motivate the person to come into compliance. Instead, what they'll do is they'll just file the appeal in order to delay the process, knowing that they don't have to pay the fee up front. And the fee is the real motivator behind coming into compliance. And that's what we really want, not so much to collect the money, but to motivate the person to come into compliance. So that's the reason why we're here now. If the city council will approve this, then we will be able to write those administrative citations. And we do believe that under those circumstances where they are written, we will be able to motivate people to come into compliance more quickly. Any questions?
Yeah, Mr. Brooks, so this basically gives the chief the authority to make determinations that would result in these administrative violations. And for example, I'm just looking at the mechanics. One of the criteria is a knowing violation of the nuisance code. So before an administrative penalty would be assessed, there has to be a determination of a knowing violation.
Of a known violation, there are some other circumstances that have to, or criteria that has to be met. It says when the violation cannot be corrected. For example, someone, because they kept refusing to comply with codes, resulted in maybe hazardous materials being spilled into the sewage system or sewage into the river. That's something you can't correct. It's already been done. Administrative citation. You put up a building without getting any building permits. It's now up, but it can't be corrected. Basically, it's going to have to probably be torn down and then rebuilt with permits. The other circumstances is when the violation can be corrected, we've given the person a notice to abate, given them a timeline to comply, and they've refused to comply with that timeline. When a stop work order has been issued by the building inspection department and the person still continues to build, this would be another situation. And then finally, when the same violation has been committed by the same responsible party within the past 12 months and a notice to abate or notice of administrative violation has been served on the responsible party within that same 12-month period. So this is for the person who's the repeat offender who keeps doing the same thing over and over again. You get them to correct the violation within a couple of weeks or a couple of months. They're right back out there maybe doing major automotive repair, or they've got the commercial vehicle parked in the residential zone. So they keep coming into compliance just long enough for us to close the case, and then they're back out of compliance. And then lastly, situations involving gross neglect, egregious violations of the Uniform Building Code, plumbing, electrical, or other structural zoning issues. Only under those circumstances would we be able to write this citation and say, you must pay up front before you appeal. All other violations would continue the way we do it now, where you will be heard before a hearing officer, and that hearing officer would determine what fees, if any, have to be paid.
Yeah, I guess my comment was just, I like to make sure that this is tight enough that you're not going to have a problem with it. Is this language, is this standard for other cities?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
So, 19.20.016, the hardship waiver section, continually references the requirement that you have to deposit in advance the full amount of the fine prior to the appeal hearing?
That would be, in certain situations, we do realize that maybe an individual really cannot pay the full amount up front.
No, but that language is, it's not underlined, so that's the existing code?
Yes.
So the existing code provides for advance?
I honestly asked that very same question, and why we had this provision and didn't have the advance deposit before. I think it was an inconsistency, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. So we probably used to require advance payment.
Yes.
And some wishy-washy city manager changed it, and we're fixing it back.
I can't speak to that.
So because this section refers to the fine as required by section 19.20.015, which doesn't require a fine. So if we're gonna, the fine is actually in .012. So when you're actually drafting this up for our final action, you might want to just make the conforming change as well. So it's clear that the hardship waiver does apply to the advance payment that we're requiring, and not to an artifact that doesn't exist anymore. So,
With the help of the city attorney, I will do that.
okay. All right. Any further discussion of item 10? All right. So this does require, this is first reading, so it requires action with that.
Those changes.
With those changes? All right. So moved by Mr. Johannesson, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Pierce. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Brooks.
I think
Oh, we
there
had
was-
two slips on this one. All right, without objection, we're going to expunge the vote on that one and return to public comment on item 10. And the first is by Mayor LaSalle, and she'll be followed by Ms. Redmond. Thank you, Mr. Beers.
Gave you two cards. All right, well, first I wanted to say that I gave you a copy of a report that was handed back to me along with my pictures concerning my favorite house, 600 Todd Hunter, which I have mentioned several times at this city council. So I will let you read that at your leisure. I'm mainly here to concur with what Larry Brooks has said about these ongoing issues, and that's what I'm here to talk about, not to bash the Code Enforcement Division. I'm recommending, based on what I've seen next door and talking to other neighbors, and issues are still going on at 600 Todd Hunter as of today. The problem houses that are subject to code violations also have police and/or fire personnel going to them. The owner may have multiple properties within our city and most likely will not live in our city. The house may be a Section 8, which guarantees the owner a certain amount of money every month. Therefore, the owner makes sure there's a short turnaround time. The same type of renter that moves in is usually the same type of renter that has just moved out. The problem houses usually have ongoing code violations, which can include electrical, plumbing, structural, uncut lawn, non-op or wrecked cars on the lawn, trash or garbage in the yard. I believe that our city should be able to have fines levied against the property that must be paid, and also lose their Section 8 because of the ongoing problems. I'm not talking about every now and then. I'm talking about these ongoing problems. And same thing would go to also owner-occupied homes with issues. And this is why I call these problem houses. As you pointed out a couple of weeks ago at the last meeting, or the meeting before that, about the Evergreen Apartments, before being redone, they had a lot of police activity going there. And this is what these problem houses have. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. LaSalle. And Rochelle Redmond.
Mary LaSalle has made a good point to me. I've actually been upset with code enforcement, and I want to apologize. I'm going to redirect my code enforcement issues to the people who come, the people, the investors, I call them, they're money makers. They come into Broderick and Bright. This has been going on for about 20 years. We have a lot less owner-occupied properties, and what I experience on my own block is they're owned by somebody, and like she said, it's the same renters over and over and over, and they have problems, and the cops are called, and they're just nothing but a nuisance, and it seems to be that same property, that same address. And I know that somebody owns a lot of these properties over there, and we call those slum landlords. And I think we need to start going after the owners of these properties who they live in another city. They live in Rancho Cordova. I know ones that live in Rancho Cordova, in Rosemont, a nice home. And their home over here looks like ran down. And that's the pattern that I've been seeing. At least over the last 20 years. I've lived in Broderick 40 years, and there's no more quality of life. And I think I've come to the conclusion that I think it falls on these people who buy these homes in Broderick and Bright at a cheap price and turn around and they're money makers for them, and they get their rent, and the Section 8 has something to do with it, and they're guaranteed that they're gonna get their money from these renters. Now, I can't say we don't have any problems with owner-occupied. We have some problems with owner-occupied. But she's brought to my attention that it seems to be that same address when I call code enforcement, or if I call code enforcement, it's the same it's just the same thing, and it's day in and day out, and every time I go in and out, it's just week after week, and it becomes month after month, and then it becomes year after year of that same Blythe property. And I think we need to hit them in the pocketbook. That's the only way you can get them to comply. And I say them, I've been blaming the people who live there, but it's really not their fault. Who are these landlords? Who are these people that we don't see for 5 years? And they just, who are these people we don't see for 15 years? I haven't seen for 15 years. And that house is just ran down, debilitated. The roof is falling apart. They don't put any money into it. It's just a money maker for them. And we live in it. And I think that's unfair. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Redmond. With that concludes our public comment on item 10. Thank you for drawing that to my attention, both Ms. LaSalle more animatedly than Mr. Beers, but both of you. So if we'll renew then the motion by Mr. Johannesson with a second by Mr. Beers. If there's no further council discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The motion carries. That brings us to item 11, which is approval of contract modifications with HDR Engineering.
Second half.
There's more? Oh, you're bootstrapping us another one. Okay, I'm sorry.
We do have a brief slide presentation.
I didn't realize I thought you were going to issue some violations against the Corps. All right.
That'll work fine. What you see here is simply our code enforcement mission statement to enforce government-initiated rules, code, laws that serve to preserve houses, maintain clean and safe industrial commercial zones, and prevent blight, and to encourage economic development and revitalization through regulation and education. The code enforcement, you may have noticed there that the police department's emblem was also on that slide, and the California Association of Code Enforcement Officers emblem was also on that slide as well. And there's a reason for that. You'll find code enforcement officers in environmental health departments, hazmat divisions, planning, and building inspection. But I'm most proud of the fact that in our case, we're in the police department, and that's because in many ways we do things similar to police departments in terms of what we can do and in terms of the training that we receive from the State Association of Code Enforcement Officers, which is one reason why sometimes we get confused with police officers, because we do have certain powers similar to theirs, but certainly not as many. And in fact, in many areas, you will hear people refer to us as the neat police because of our role in trying to clean up neighborhoods. But with next slide, please, you'll get a better picture of what it is we actually do. We take care of these primary types of code violations: blight, which would include junk, lawn parking, street obstructions, zoning, signage, land regulation, fencing, animal keeping, use permits, landscaping, housing, rental, dangerous buildings, vacant buildings, motels, vehicle abatement. And that's part of what we get our training on. That's just a partial list of the areas that we cover: health and safety codes, uniform building codes, hazmat code, penal codes. We're kind of a generalist, and you'll understand in one of the other slides part of the reason why the State Association provides us with such a broad amount of training. Next slide. This is a partial list of some of the other types of violations that we get involved in, and now you can maybe better understand why we have to get such a broad education. It's because we work with so many different departments in order to try to become their enforcement arm. So parks with regards to trees without permits, community development and public works for overwatering and illegal dumping and graffiti, the State Housing Community Development Department for mobile home violations, Finance Department for business license. We do some things with the Port of Sacramento here, and also with Fire Department, commercial industrial building violations. And with the District Attorney's Office, you'll notice that I have on my Yolo County Unlicensed Contractor Rapid Apprehension Team shirt on today, because we do a lot of work in the community conducting sting operations. Over the last 3 years, we've actually apprehended over 100 individuals operating without a contractor's license permit here in Yolo County.
That's not a great shirt for a sting operation.
You're right. It kind of, well, you should have saw me when I was delivering pizzas at the Sting House. It kind of looked like a pizza, but another story for another time. We work quite a bit with the health department too on various types of environmental issues such as ice cream truck inspection. So as I said, this is just a partial list just to give you some idea of some of the things we do. Next slide, please. Staff resources. That question has come up before, and we wanted to try to address it now. And at this point in time, thank you for your commitment to the city and the citizens here in terms of code enforcement. You'll notice in terms of our population, the number of code enforcement officers we have, 5 code enforcement officers. If you notice Woodland, they're going through some tough times. They just eliminated a code enforcement officer. They're now down to 1 code enforcement officer, even though they have a much bigger population than we do. Rancho Cordova has 6 code enforcement officers for their population. Folsom just eliminated a code enforcement officer due to some public outcry. They restored that position. They're back up to 2 code enforcement officers, but 1 is now on limited term, and they anticipate it will probably be gone within the year. Citrus Heights has 3 code enforcement officers. Elk Grove, 5 code enforcement officers. Yolo County has only 1 to cover the entire unincorporated area. That position was recently vacated and frozen. So I believe in terms of what the city council has committed to the residents of West Sacramento is something that should be commended. Next slide. This kind of shows what you get for the commitment that you've made to the citizens by allowing us to have 5 code enforcement officers. Even though over the last few years the city population grew, and with that the number of cases reported to us by citizens grew, the average resolution time actually went down because we were able to put the staff to use. And also through various other innovations and improvements in technology, we were able to reduce the amount of time it takes to resolve most of the complaints that we receive, much to the delight of the citizens of West Sacramento. Next slide. This is just kind of a quick breakdown of where most of the resources are going. 50% of our time is mainly with blight. Things that directly affect residential property values. Substandard housing, I think some people have talked about the issues with rental properties. We also, under substandard housing, that includes our proactive motel inspection program where we're trying to get ahead of the curve on some issues. Working with the building department, finance department on building permits and business licenses where we have about 10% of our workload. And then finally, the other portion of our work is vehicle abatement, non-op and unregistered vehicles in residential zones. Next slide. How do we prioritize complaints? That question has come up on a few occasions. This kind of answers that for you. We try to prioritize by what is urgent, health and safety issues, what's life-threatening, what's imminently dangerous, you know, houses that are flooded with sewage, roofs collapsing, anything that might be an imminent danger. The next category in terms of our triaging cases is latent health and safety issues, code violations that are not an immediate health and safety threat, but absent intervention, they may become category 1, something imminently dangerous. And then examples of that would be vermin infestation, animal hoarding, remodeling without permits. And then lastly, we categorize our nuisance complaints, violations that pose an immediate obtrusive inconvenience, but not a danger to the complainants. Next slide. Some of our accomplishments, and this is just a partial list, but we've been able to reduce calls for service at Tiffany Manor Apartments by working with the police department's community response team. Again, I can't say enough about the benefits of us being in the police department in order to do the work we do, because it does allow us to partner with them often. Participated in the Harbor Park Apartments renovation project. We've been resolving some code violations at the port, much to the delight of the Port Authority. The pole sign replacement is nearly complete, and we couldn't have done that without the Chamber of Commerce and the majority of the businesses within West Sacramento cooperating with us to eliminate their pole signs and put up monument signs. Our routine motel inspection program is, I believe, working very well. We've been participating in the mobile home task force. We recently did a vehicle amnesty day, and we plan to do that again along with the citywide neighborhood cleanup. Participation in the Chamber's Project Pride initiatives. A garage sale ordinance was adopted by the City Council this year, and we include that as one of our major accomplishments. And probably most of all, we've investigated over 1,100 code enforcement cases this last fiscal year. And those are the ones that were actually opened up as cases. That doesn't count the number of complaints we received where we were actually able to resolve matters simply by phone calls or courtesy letters or knock on the door. That's it.
All right, other questions for Mr. Brooks? Mr. Johannesson?
It's not so much a question, but just a comment. I think, Larry, you've done a great job since coming to West Sacramento. As council, we don't necessarily receive a lot of calls, people wondering when the streets and the Bridge District are going to be laid out. It's more, what's going on next door, and as we've heard tonight. And I know it's really, really important to our residents, the continued efforts we're doing toward code enforcement. And it's an ongoing process. We have another tool, it looks like we're developing here tonight. But, this type of thing has probably one of the most direct impacts that we can do to these neighborhoods. And I think that in combination with the chief's outreach that's been happening in the community, I'm seeing a huge difference, particularly in Brighton, Broderick. Community attitudes, neighborhood revitalizations going on. Of course, there's wrinkles, there's properties that we need to figure out how to deal with, short of bulldozing. I don't know if that's an option or not, but, to deal with that. So I just really want to commend you all for the work you're putting in, because I think we are seeing results of that now.
And that reminds me, our partnership with the Bright Broderick Community Action Group has helped us a great deal in terms of identifying issues to address and working with them. So I do want to commend them for what they've done to help us be more effective.
Mr. Kristoff?
Yeah, Larry, I don't know if we received this in our packet. It was a letter from the Arlington Oaks Park Boulevard. You've gotten it?
We
Okay.
got it, and
Okay.
we're starting to investigate it now.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Beers?
Larry, thanks for the presentation, and clearly the list of accomplishments is impressive. One of the comments we heard earlier had to do with absentee landlords, repeat offenders. Do we have any special ability to go after that type of individual?
Yes.
I mean, so much more aggressive about that as a way of business. I was thinking while she was talking that we could probably cross-reference some of the bills on our water or utilities with some of these properties and probably identify people that really are, consistently abusing things and focusing too much attention on resources, especially repeat stuff.
That's correct. In the last year or so, there's been quite a few advances made regionally in light of what has been going on with foreclosed properties in particular, which is also helping us with rental properties. There's been alliances with the Board of Realtors, with the Rental Housing Association, with various mortgage and banking associations to come up with ways to identify who really owns this property, who's responsible, who's going to get it cleaned up. And by forming those alliances and accessing those databases within the last year regionally, code enforcement is becoming much more effective at finding out where the landlord lives, if it's a landlord, or who's the bank that's responsible for this particular property, or property management association.
And that's all good. I guess I was kind of more interested in where it's really egregious. Is there legal actions that we can take to sue these people for the whole cost of all of the efforts we're taking? I mean, make it much more painful for people that are causing this problem?
Yes, two ways. Through our regular nuisance abatement hearing process, we can request that the hearing officer add fines and penalties charged for the time involved in a case, and also through the ordinance amendment that you're looking at now, through the administrative citation process. Under certain circumstances, we may be able to use that to impose fees, fines of $100 a day, $250 a day, $500 a day, for each day the person's not in compliance.
Okay. Now, the other question, it's actually almost more of a comment or whatever, but we, as Mr. Johannesson said earlier, I mean, a lot of times we get comments, concerns about code enforcement. And it appears to me that there's just an entirely too large of a disconnect between what's really going on and what people see. Now, why would we not be able to put onto our website a frank assessment, just a list of every code enforcement action that we have on file, that we've opened, that we can, what's the status of it? So it's no longer a mystery. I mean, frankly, I have no. If somebody has a code enforcement action and there was a number, you didn't put a number to it, where you said you do a courtesy call, you resolve it, and it's off the books. I'm not talking about that, but where you actually have an open case you're pursuing to some sort of resolution, why can't we just list that somewhere so that people no longer are, sitting across the street or next door saying, nobody's listening to me. I mean, it's an open government action. There doesn't seem to me to be any reason that we wouldn't want to just put that on there. And we don't have to get specific. We can put the address and we can say what we're doing and what the status is, then open, close, whatever. But something that does a better service for people in the community who are frustrated, but they're frustrated for the wrong reason. We're engaged in a process, sometimes a very extensive process, but the fact that somebody's at least doing something, if they know that, then that's going to probably be useful information. And so all of the good effort that we're investing in the community isn't misunderstood.
You're absolutely right, and we have been moving in that direction with the help of the city manager's office. This year we did become part of the Access West Sacramento link on the website, where people can actually make their complaints on the web.
Well, I'm talking about, though, just a listing of everything that we're doing. So if somebody is sitting there, maybe they won't make a complaint if they know something's being done, or won't make the same complaint 3 or 4 or 5 times, or you'll get 5 complaints from one neighborhood about one house, because there'll be a place where they can go that says, this isn't an active issue.
That's something I can look into. That may be the next phase in the Access West Sacramento, because right now you can make a complaint and you can go back and look at your complaint and you can actually track it online. Mm-hmm. But as far as all of our, say, 1,100 cases we handled this past year, we haven't advanced to that stage, but certainly I can look into it.
Well, you obviously have reports. I mean, if you just put it to a system where you're counting your 1,100 cases, it might actually go a long way to demonstrating to people in the community. I don't want you to add work, but if you're already recording the information somewhere, put it in a public place, people can see what's going on. It actually becomes a good selling point to what is happening in the community.
Okay, yeah, we can look into that.
Please be careful as you do. I mean, the Cummins instance was one example, but many code enforcement complaints are generated through disputes by neighbors, and have other corollary reasons for their filings. And there's a reason why we don't report publicly even people whose utility bills are late by name, or people who are the subject of an investigation by the police department for some other reason, because in the event that they're cleared, their good reputation and name has been damaged. And in an era where employers, potential spouses, and others can go on the internet and see, oh my gosh, all these complaints have been filed against this person, that's not an indicator, when none of them have reached the point where your unit has determined that there is an actual violation that needs to be remedied or corrected or fined or what have you. To me, that raises some serious issues. And so I would be careful about how much transparency in the process leading up to the point where wherever the complaints have been subject to an actual review and investigation, and there's been a determination that they actually are at fault in the way that is contemplated in our ordinance. Because there is a cost to people, at least in the modern age, to having that information out there when all that's been occurred is an accusation.
Excellent point. We'll take that into consideration. If there's no other questions.
Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, maybe just to chime in on the, what Councilmember Beers was mentioning. I know that the police department is reactionary to a certain extent, that they're complaint-driven, that it's good to complain to the police if you've got a problem, and people should do that. Even if it's a repetitive complaint, I think what happens is there's a tabulation and it rises to a certain level. So even though it may be a consistent complaint, it may be a good thing that they have 30 consistent complaints, because then it kind of, I think, rises to a level, well, now we should, be doing something. And I think Access West Sacramento is a good way to do that, because you actually have controls, you retain those complaints, and you have a way to assign responsibility for those complaints and checking the complaints off. So I think it's a good way to, as long as people have internet, but, also I think Access West Sacramento, so people are clear, you can call anyone in the city if you don't have a computer, and they can access West Sacramento. So you don't necessarily have to have a computer to do that.
All right, thank you. I know when I came on the council, there was one code enforcement officer, and I believe that both Mr. Beers and Mr. Christoph were on the council at the time, that they had worked very hard in much tougher, well, not that now, but in very tough budget times, to add a second code enforcement officer and then continue the march towards building a unit that could start to address these issues, because we do have significant code challenges across the range of issues that you described. And so I know it's been a priority for the council, will continue to be. And the chart that you provided of where we stand in the region was helpful. We like being the leader, but it's also we're not comfortable, because there remains a large number of these issues and complaints and blight problems in the community that we want to continue to tackle. So.
Yeah, as I recall, Bill and I always wanted 5, but we were outvoted by the rest.
All right, thank you, Mr. Brooks. Thank you. All right, now item 11 is approval of contract modifications with HDR Engineering Incorporated for services to support the West Sacramento Levee Improvement Program, and a new contract to support the general reevaluation report, and a verbal update on the flood protection program. Mr. Bissett.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. Tonight for your consideration is the approval of contract modifications with HDR Engineering for services to support the West Sacramento Levee Improvement Program, and a new contract to support the general reevaluation report. I'll also provide a brief update on the flood program this evening. My last update to you was in March. Since that time, we've made good progress in the flood protection program. The I Street project, which was our first EIP project that we completed construction on in 2008, we're still completing the construction documentation report and the record drawings. And that may seem like it's taking a while, but these are the documents that are going to provide the levee certification for this project. So we got to get these documents right. They're going through a review process now. We'll be running those through the Army Corps and the state to get their comments, and then we'll finalize those documents. And essentially, they'll sit on a shelf until we've completed all of our levee improvements. So we got to do the job right. We got to record the construction, how it took place, all the sign-offs from all the agencies involved in the project, so that years down the road we can get that levee section certified. We're also coordinating with the Parks Department for a grand opening of the Riverwalk project. This is important from our perspective, because we want to promote to the public levee improvements and recreational opportunities, a combined project, so that the public can see where their dollars are going. We want to maximize state investments in these projects. We want to show the public not only the levee improvements that protects life and property, but there's also other aspects that we can gain from these projects as far as recreational components. We are also incorporating some recreational components in our 2010 EIP projects, the Rivers site in particular. We have 2 projects in design for 2010 construction. They're CHP Academy and the Rivers project site. We're expecting 30% designs from HDR Engineering this week, and we'll be scheduled for 60% designs in mid-August. So we're moving forward on these projects. We'll start the public outreach process in August also on these projects. We had to wait till we had a 60% design level so that we had our improvements finalized to the point where we could actually talk to the public about them. We have them at a point where the project footprints are set. We know the impacts on the sites and how the public may be impacted and how we can mitigate for those impacts. So we want to be able to have a dialogue with the public with substantial information. So we'll be starting that process very soon. We're also coordinating extensively with the Army Corps and the Department of Water Resources. Also, the railroads and utility companies on these projects. So it requires a lot of extensive coordination activities to get these projects designed properly. We also have real estate components that we'll be looking at for temporary and permanent easement. So there's also a real estate component involved in these projects. The programmatic EIR, EIS is underway. We have a admin draft currently under review internally. We're providing our comments to our consulting firm. They'll take those comments, reissue an admin draft, and that'll go out to the Army Corps and the state and get that process going. We're expecting the programmatic EIR, EIS to be completed in May of next year, and that'll allow for our construction projects in 2010 to be able to move forward. The state EIP funding agreement, this is how we're going to be paying for the majority of our work. The decision memo and the funding agreement are essentially completed. DWR is routing those documents internally now. We expect to have the funding agreement signed by the middle of this month, and then it gets sent over to the Department of General Services for final approval. We expect final approval by the end of this month. In the meantime, we're working on our quarterly work plan and our budget, which is what we have to submit to the department in order to acquire funding. So we're trying to get those documents in hand so that once the funding agreement is completed, our quarterly work plan is submitted and it fast tracks us receiving money. We're hoping, and with the best information we have available from the Department of Water Resources, to see some funding in late August or September. That's what we're looking at right now for our EIP funding. On the general reevaluation report, we began the study. We're working with the Army Corps now. The Corps staff are doing a lot of data review that we've produced over the past year or so. We're also working on in-kind services. We're coordinating with their staff on the tasks that are involved in that study, and we're trying to identify which ones that we can handle ourselves through our consultants or internally. And so that process is moving forward. I'm coordinating with the Army Corps to provide periodic updates to the council and also to the JPA. They do a similar thing for SAFCA across the river, so they're going to also do that for us. And we're strategizing on what's the correct timing to have those updates. We have a public scoping meeting on July 21st for the general reevaluation report. That'll be here in this building. It's a Tuesday. We'll have 2 sessions, one in the late afternoon and one in the evening. And we have been notified by the state that their participation, their official participation in the GRR is going to be delayed a little bit. They're looking at early 2010 or the fiscal year to start July 1st of 2010 before they can submit money and actually enter into a contract for this study. They are supplying staff, they are attending their meetings, they are involved in the process, but they cannot officially sign new contracts for this study until that time period. For 2009 construction, we're coordinating with the Army Corps on the Yolo bypass slip repairs. That process is moving forward. The design is essentially completed. The Corps is going to be submitting those plans to their contracting unit. They're expecting to be awarding a contract at the end of August with construction starting in September. That's the time frame we're looking at for the Yolo bypass slip repairs. On the Sac Bank Extension project in Southport, that project also is in design. We're expecting 90% design plans in August, final plans in October, and we're hoping that project starts construction towards the latter part of this year. Essentially, they'll do the environmental mitigation, the elderberry bush relocations starting in that time frame, and then they'll do the actual levee construction in early 2010. We're also coordinating that project with our EIP project, which is scheduled for us for 2011. So right after their project is done, we're going to expand upon it, both to the north and south. So that's our 2011 EIP project. We're also coordinating with the Department of Water Resources. They have several activities underway. They held a kickoff meeting here in our city hall, and we had the mayor make a brief presentation at that event. The state, essentially, it's a Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. Their goal is to provide 200-year flood protection for the whole Central Valley by 2025. Their plan is just starting. They hope to complete it by early 2012. And we'll be participating in some of the work groups that they have so that we can look out for our city's interests as that process moves forward. One upcoming item that'll be coming to the board next week is the creation of a senior board of consultants. This is a requirement by the Army Corps. It's essentially from the Water Resources Development Act of 2007. It's a requirement for a safety assurance review. We didn't have to do that for the I Street project because it was such a short project, but our next round of projects, we do have to engage this senior board. We're using the same experts that SAFECA is using, recommended by our program manager with MBK. And these are independent panel of experts. They're experts in geotechnical engineering and hydrology. So essentially what they'll do is they'll be reviewing all our project documentation reports and our design plans to assure that our projects don't have negative impacts regionally. And it's a requirement by the Army Corps, and that'll be coming to the council next week. For the HDR contracts, I wanted to point out several items. Our flood program is very dynamic and involves numerous variables, such as working with the Army Corps and the state, their processes for funding and permitting, and just project coordination. They have projects going on, we have projects, and we're coordinating all of those. So it requires a lot of effort, and it can change on a dime in this program. There's also real estate, environmental, geotechnical aspects involved in these projects that can steer a project one way where we thought it was going to go, and we have to pivot and go in a different direction. These projects require large sums of money, as you know, which triggers increased oversight and scrutiny on our projects, on our designs, on our program. So with the state and the Corps investing large amounts of money into our system, it requires a lot more oversight than just your normal project. That requires more effort on our part and on our consultants' part to get these projects approved and ready for construction. HDR contracts, the ones that we want to modify, that we're proposing for modification, were initiated in 2007. We've had a series of project adjustments, such as revising, expanding the project limits. We've had issues come up with items I just discussed, with geotechnical aspects, required us to enlarge a project versus what we anticipated originally. We've also had a schedule expanded due to funding delays from the state. That last year we intended to do the I Street and the CHP Academy. Well, we didn't have any money from the state at that time. We elected to move forward on I Street, but we had to fund that ourselves. So that there was a delay in that project. We've also expanded the limits on that project to correct a deficiency that was unknown at the time. Elements of the The contract modification include project management, geotechnical investigations and analysis, increased surveying and mapping, and environmental services. These costs are included in the state funding agreement, and essentially, the state should share in these costs at least 70% for the projects we have moving forward. These contracts were taken to the JPA board last month, and they were approved. For the general reevaluation report, in-kind services, as I mentioned earlier, our approach is to maximize our in-kind services. We want to take control of as many of these study aspects as we can. We want to influence the quality, cost, and schedule by doing that, so we can move this project forward as quickly as possible. We want to also utilize local firms. HDR is having talks and entering into contracts with local firms here in the city that can handle some of these tasks that we've identified. So we're trying to maximize that effort. And also city staff. We're trying to utilize our city staff and keep our employees as busy as possible with this program. We're also going to issue work on a task order basis, so it's going to be in a very controlled manner. We work with the Army Corps. They write up the scope of work for the particular task. We'll engage either HDR or one of their subs or our own staff and come up with a work plan and move that forward and issue it on a task-by-task basis. So it's going to be a very controlled manner on this contract. That concludes my presentation tonight. I'm ready for any questions. I also have Eric Nagy, our project manager with HDR, present if you have any questions for Eric.
All right, Mr. Christoph.
Really no questions, just a couple comments. I mean, I think HDR has done a very good job for us. They do an awful lot of engineering work within the entire region, and it seems that all of the data, we get to use their data, they get to use our data, and so, I mean, I think this is really, we're getting the biggest bang for our buck. I mean, I realize that these engineering contracts and these extensions to the GRR and things, you know, it's expensive. I mean, it's not cheap, you know, 2.8 and 1.7, something like that. But, I mean, I think that long-term, we have a very aggressive plan as far as flood protection for the citizens of our city. We're moving down that road as fast as we can, and yet at the same time, I think we're being as fiscally prudent as we possibly can. So I would recommend that we that we support this agenda item tonight.
Mayor Pro Tem Beers.
Yeah, thanks for your report, and it's very comprehensive, and a lot of stuff's going on. I was wondering to myself if all the paper that we have to produce can be used as fill in the levees to shave off some of our costs. Two things occurred to me. Well, one, could you expand a little bit more? I understand the general reevaluation report. First of all, when is that supposed to be completed?
That'll be in the middle of 2012, as we're expecting the chief's report.
Middle of 2012.
June, July 2012.
It just appears to me that there's a lot of overlap from all the work we're doing. So the cost of 5.7, is that all new? I mean, we've been doing a ton of evaluation of the levies, so there's no duplication in the GRR?
No, there's no duplication.
What work have we not been doing?
If we hadn't have done that work, the cost of the GRR
would have been. So this is like continuing from where we were forward?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they're going to look at our system in a little bit more expanded than we did, a little bit more regionally. That's the Army Corps' requirement to do so.
Okay.
So it expands upon the analysis work that has to take place.
Well, that's comforting. I was fearful that we were just getting into another bureaucratic box there. But the other thing you mentioned was this new requirement for the senior review. At first, I thought that was an age issue. You had to have older people look at it.
They didn't like that title either.
Yeah.
They're mostly retired individuals.
And so I was kind of curious about this. Is this a sequential type thing? All the work's done and then these people come in and look at it again?
No, the reason
Is it done concurrently? Because that was very bothersome to me. If you do all this work, then you have these, experts come in and look at it, and they say, oops, and then you start over again.
That's exactly the point. That's why we want to bring them on now. We're at 30% design for these EIPs. It's a perfect time to bring them in.
Okay.
They've actually reviewed a lot of the hydraulic reports for our system because they're working across the river.
All
So
right.
there's a lot of the same hydrology and hydraulic impacts. So, no, it's a perfect time to bring them on.
All right, so that's good. All right, thank you.
Just let me follow up a little bit on that, because I was going to bring this issue up tomorrow, because we have a JPA meeting tomorrow. I mean, it just seems like there's another layer of bureaucracy stuck in this flood protection issue that takes so long for anybody to get through. It's sort of frustrating, because here we used to do this work, and then the Corps would do they'd take it back, they would analyze, they'd go through all of these processes that these supposedly senior people are going to, that they're going to look at. The Corps is going to look at it again. I mean, they're not going to just, I mean, heck, we all know what the Corps does. I mean, they study things, and it just seems so frustrating that we would have to go through this.
I agree, but it's just another checks and balances, and like I mentioned earlier, the massive amount of monies that go into these projects and the regional impacts. I think it's just another check on their part to assure that these projects are moving forward with no regrets and no impacts on the system.
So it's my understanding, though, that these senior people get paid out of a different pot. It's not necessarily a percentage of the levee repair that, we'll say, SAFCA's doing and then West Sacramento's doing. And how do they get paid?
No, it's an extra charge. They're basically independent consultants.
That's what I thought.
Those charges, and I didn't mention that, they're also included in our funding agreement with the state. So the state and eventually the Corps will be picking up these costs, a large percentage of these costs. But that's how they're going to get paid.
Okay, never mind. Thank you.
Further questions or comments?
No, Mr.
mean,
Mayor, I'd make a motion. Do you want to make a comment?
I mean, I'm supportive
I know
of this.
you're
I mean, I've been, I don't know, spending the last 48 hours in Congress on this, my mind is numb by all the stuff that we're trying to do in this regard. But you're absolutely right, Mr. Crow. I mean, we have a very aggressive program. It's very comprehensive. We have a very strong internal team, Mr. Panos, Mr. Bissett, the city manager, and others. And HDR is certainly doing a good job on our behalf. But it's a huge lift that we're attempting. Well, it's like a whole bunch of gigantic lifts on the scale of, I mean, it's on the same scale as the country trying to put a man on the moon, but we're trying to put him on several different planets simultaneously. I mean, the size of our city doing these sorts of things is it's a lot, and there's a lot of moving parts, and every single one of them involves 90% unnecessary and unpredictable bureaucracy, but it's just the stuff we have to do in order to get this work complete. So this work is necessary, it is important, and this is a huge amount of money that we're appropriating tonight in order to expand the work under the contract, but it's necessary in order for us to keep all of these balls in the air in order to make sure that we're able to deliver on the improved public safety for the citizens and the businesses of the city. So thanks for, and I know Mr. Christoph spent a lot, not just time here, but at the JPA and elsewhere to get this work done, and I know he's frustrated as well. But also has been pushing to make sure that we make real progress. And we are. I mean, that is important. The I Street project and the CHP project, the other AIPs, because of the inability of the state to participate financially in virtually anything that they've committed to, and the fact that we can't get federal authorizations till the GRR is done. I mean, all the actual physical improvements are ones that we funded, and those are important because we're going to run out of money, and the voters of the community, the taxpayers of the community, need to see that we've done real improvements. That we've not spent all or most of the resources that they've provided just on studies and analyses and reports, which we know are essential to qualify us to get all of the hundreds of millions of dollars that are necessary to get the complete project done. But to be frank, I mean, for our constituents here, they need to see in-the-ground improvements in the levees, and I know you, through the EIPs and other projects, we're delivering those, and that's a critical part of the strategy as we go forward. Okay. So,
Mr. Mayor, I'd move that the City Council approve contract modifications with HDR Engineering Incorporated for the services to support the West Sacramento Levee Improvement Program and a new contract for services to support the General Reevaluation Report.
All right, it's been moved by Mr. Kristoff and seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Beers. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and opposed, hearing none, that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 12, and I have your card, Mary. But item 12 is additional information regarding the biennial capital budget, fiscal year 2009-10 and 2010-11, and capital improvement plan 2009-10 to 2013-14. Mr. Panos has been demoted from between item 11 to item 12 and is back as capital facilities manager for this item. Welcome.
Thank you. On June 10th, the City Council participated in a workshop regarding the biennial capital budget and capital improvement plan. As a result of that workshop, the City Council requested some additional information. This brief report is to summarize how staff responded to the Council's request for additional information. City Council requested staff review the CIP and determine if the cost information contained in the document, the CIP document, reflected the current bid environment. Staff was requested to review the entries and determine if adjustments were needed, and the adjustments were made and are reflected in the current CIP. The Council requested the staff determine the impacts from reductions in the state funding supplied as a result of Proposition 42. Staff had determined the revenue provided by the state to the city as a result of Proposition 42 has already been deferred for a number of years. In fact, the payment that we received this year was for 2004. Staff determined that if one of the budget proposals was to defer payments to the city, it would not have an immediate effect on our cash flow for capital projects. State budget proposals regarding Proposition 42 and other state funding sources should continue to be monitored. The Council requested that staff examine the possibility of a capital reserve account that can contain project cost and bid savings. Staff examined a number of recent capital projects and determined savings, both from the difference between project estimates and bids and from contingency savings. In the sample that we took, about $5 million, actually $5.4 million. Staff also has developed some draft language for a budget policy, a draft budget policy document regarding a capital reserve budget. Planning, and we're currently planning on how to implement such a policy if approved, and that's in process. The Council requested that staff revise the listing of capital projects proposed within the next 2 years to better determine what capital projects could be implemented, what capital projects could be delayed, and what capital projects could be closed. And we reorganized the list so that it's in that order, and the reorganized listing is included in the agenda report and the attachments. In addition, the Council requested that the staff differentiate for those closed capital projects that are actually complete as compared to those that are closed for a different reason. And the differential listing is also included. Of 77 projects closed, more than half were completed. The remaining projects were closed due to other funding, change in plans, et cetera. By the way, the vast majority of those were in the port, and it really is due to planning and other funding that's associated with the port's planning for capital projects. The Council requested that staff review the CIP and determine if the capital projects that have multiple phases of construction are that they're properly reflected in the document. Staff was requested to review the entries and determine if adjustments were needed. Adjustments were made and reflected in the current CIP. The Council requested that staff specifically determine if the West Capitol Streetscape Project Phase 2 was listed in the CIP in the 5-year portion of the CIP. Staff was requested to review the entry and determine if adjustments were needed. Adjustments were made. The project is number 15016 on page 15 of the CIP. The Council requested staff analyze the water enterprise funding to determine methods that could improve fund balances. Staff is currently reviewing the funding sources, and preliminary corrective actions are being evaluated. A briefing paper, white paper on our work to date is included in your package. The Council requested that staff evaluate the water meter installation program to determine if the program can be modified in some way. The staff completed an evaluation and recommends that the water meter installation program continue. A briefing paper, though, is summarizing the evaluation is included in your packet. The council requested that staff remove the current bicycle master plan from the CIP and the Measure K funding source. Adjustments were made and reflected in the current CIP. The council requested that staff install more visible city identification signs on street sweeping vehicles. Staff inspected all of the public works vehicles for proper identification signage. Staff determined that the new signs are needed and will be ordered for some vehicles. Respectfully, staff would like the council's consideration and input regarding the attached current and proposed vehicle signage. The council requested staff review the CIP and determine if park and recreation projects currently funded by Measure K funding can be funded through other capital funding sources. Staff is currently reviewing other funding sources, but staff has moved or closed all of the park and recreation projects funded by Measure K except project number 62330, a bridge district project related to the Riverwalk expansion. And I think that summarizes the question, or the additional information that the council had as part of the previous workshop, and I'll take any questions or comments that the council may have.
All right, let me just first observe that this was an excellent, a really, really good staff report, and point by point, and both in terms of the substance of the responses and the presentation, the formatting of it was really helpful in terms of the issues that were raised at the last session, and repeating them and then analyzing and showing everything that was, at least from my perspective, everything that we asked was done and more, and it's a very strong document in that way. Particularly the garbage truck logos, which I'm sorry, street sweeper logos, yeah. All right, questions for Mr. Panos? Mr. Christoph?
Yeah, Bill, in the delay of the water meter implementation plan, in the report that I read that went along with it, the staff report that went along with it, I thought I read that it would be 2016 before water is actually going through all of these meters and being charged and everything else. So will we not be charging meter rates until 2016?
I'm not sure of the answer to that question, but I can check.
You understand my question, though. The question is here we're supposed to have this thing done by 2012.
Right.
We're not going to have it done by 2012, so we are going to continue the water meter installations. There will be, once the water meters are all completely done, then we will start the program of how we are charging people for water, the water that goes through the meters. So will that be, we won't be charging until 2016, or because, will everybody still be on their same flat rate?
No, people will be brought on to the rate as we get sections and as people opt to do it. So it won't be, and I don't believe it's 2016 in any case. I think we'll have it done by the 2012.
Well, you know, I wanted to follow up on that piece too, because first of all, we funded and implemented a program to have it done by the state due date, and to say we were going to miss it by 4 years, I think that around 3 years after it's due, the state would finally realize it hadn't been done. They get angry, but so I just wasn't accepting that we weren't going to meet the deadline as a threshold question.
Yeah, I don't think that's the conclusion, that we will be missing the deadline.
Well, it is in the staff report.
Right.
So
but it is in the it's in the staff.
So you know, I think
Yeah.
we do need to specifically follow up on that, and I think the nature of the follow-up is that if we're not going to meet 2012, why not? And then what are the ramifications of that to the city? Because we don't need any extra grief, you know, for not complying.
Okay.
And I guess the next step I would take with that, if we are not going to make it, and I think you're right, we don't need the grief. But I mean, if you're not going to make it, I think that there are a lot of circumstances that have happened within the last couple of years that make any entity out there, that make all entities that are trying to adhere to these state standards as far as water meters are concerned, they're going to be behind the 8 ball. They're not going to make it because especially with what's gone on in the building industry and the amount of monies that are generated and everything, you don't make it. So I would like to see if a letter or something can go out to Lois and Yamada and say, hey, look, we're not going to make this. We don't want any grief. We don't want any headaches or anything else. We're doing everything we can, but with the economy and the state that it's in, we'd like to request a couple years so that we can complete the program. I don't know how anybody else feels about that. I guess maybe we should wait until we see how close we are to the deadline of 2012. But I mean, I still think that we need to start to lay the groundwork so we don't get fined.
Well, I think we just need a report on what's the status of this particular program, and if there is going to be a problem, then what are our alternatives? At least on that issue.
We weren't 4 years late when it was Michael Bissett's program. That's all I have to say.
The what? Bill, on the payment that the Rivers owes us, the Rivers owes us a payment, a couple $1 million, $3 million, or whatever it is. Have we set up a plan so that we can receive those payments?
Yes. We have an agreement with the company to provide a relatively nominal sum for a period of 5 years and then the remainder at that point.
Okay, but that, if I read between the lines there, then that doesn't mean we're collecting the full amount?
We will collect the full amount, yes, by the end of the term. We are just extending the time frame for them to provide that full amount.
Okay. Because, I mean, well, okay, the Broderick Bright Group, but that's another whole other story. And also, have we got any confirmation from the city of Sacramento on their streetcar participation? Are they moving forward as rapidly as we are so that we can be on a parallel track so that everybody, we all know at the end of another year of doing whatever we're doing, we're going to have their cooperation?
My understanding is that they're actively participating, and in fact, I think there's a group that has been formed.
The new steering committee.
Yeah.
The new
to be
steering
convened. Yeah.
So that's moving forward. Their participation is moving forward.
So they didn't move their,
Huh?
No, we haven't done it.
Oh.
okay.
Well, they can't convene without us, can they?
No, they're not there.
Okay.
But we call it.
Oh, okay.
Okay, never mind. Okay, thank you, that's good.
Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, Bill, this is, I think, a great way to present this. It actually gives us the opportunity to really show in black and white how the priorities work out in the funding, you know, what's going to be deferred and what is not going to be deferred. I just had a couple on the Broderick boat ramp, just so I can understand where these numbers are coming from. There's a park impact fee fund. This is that account 62003. It's on the keep list. We just had a agenda item showing the city match as being $221,000, and this shows a project cost of $788,000. Just want to make sure what the interaction between those two.
So for that project, the project is 62003, the Broderick Boat Ramp. The adopted CIP budget was $788,300, and that was a number of years ago. This is, I think we were talking about this during the workshop, is that we estimate some of these things in previous years, and those estimates generally change, or the bids come in differently than what the estimate previously was. And so the actual project cost, the construction cost, will be about $663,060 instead of what we thought it to be $788,000. So that's one of the differences that you see. And that fundamentally means that the bid came in a little bit less than the estimate. Now remember, a portion of that is ours and a portion of that is the grants, because there's a grant associated with this project, a large one actually, grant associated with that project. So briefly, the difference is due to the reduction in the construction bid versus the estimated construction cost, as I said. And there's also additional funds because the project has some additional permitting and some other navigation. There's a navigation hazard that we found With these construction projects, a lot of it is discovery. And that actually added a little bit of money to it, about $86,000, something like that. So due to the grant conditions and the agreement that we have with the grants, we had a little bit of savings and then we had a little bit of a cost increase. But due to the grant conditions, any of those savings from the difference of the construction estimate and the bid amount will be returned to the granting agency. This is an example of where the granting agency will take the savings from, because they're providing so much of the money. Our agreement is that if we have savings if they're going to pay for the construction, between the construction and the bid, they get those monies back. It's very typical of granting agencies. So that's really the difference between those, and that's what I generally understand is going to happen.
Okay. All right, and then I guess what this is showing is on the bottom line of the closed projects, it looks like we've been able to save $6.9 million, something along that line. And then my understanding what happens is that money is then rolled into new projects that we've approved. Is that kind of how that works?
Generally speaking, what happens is we have fund balances. And so that if you have 10 projects that are in an authorized listing of projects that the council's authorized, and let's say we're working on 9 of them. And of the 9 projects, we estimate that those 9 projects are going to cost $9, but they actually come in at, I don't know, $8 or something. We might pick up that extra 10th project, and generally that's kept within the fund. That's been the traditional way that we have been utilizing fund balances within the various funds in the capital program, based on what I understand. In this particular case, some of these monies are available back, would be generally available back into these funding streams, separate funding streams for the next project down the list. Now, what we have discussed before is the possibility of doing something different, something where there's if you will, a deferral or a parking of the monies, so that there's another consideration as to whether or not the council can look at those again and determine whether or not the things that they had previously approved in the CIP is what they continue to want to do. And so that's what we're studying now, this capital reserve policy or some other sort of mechanism by which that activity can occur. And this would be an example of some of the monies. Now, some of these may go back to granting agencies. Some of them, like we were just discussing, some of them may be available to us, but it varies from project to project.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the gist of the conversation that we had last time is once we have surpluses like this, that it's not necessarily an automatic rollover, but there is an additional level of policy that needs to be discussed at council. So I'm definitely looking forward to see what happens on that.
Mayor Pro Tem Beers.
Again, this was a very readable report. It's very responsive to the questions, up and to including the decal on the street sweeper. But, so I do have a question, though. So it says, are projects properly listed in the CIP? No, not that one. The cost estimates, so you went through the entire CIP?
Yeah, we had all of the engineers that participated. They sent out an email.
So is the list on attachment 2 the only ones that, I'm confused, where were the numbers changed, or where is it reflected if there was any adjustment?
I would have to go back and evaluate and talk to each one.
Was there a savings? I mean, I guess.
There were adjustments, and some of them actually went up, some of them went down. There were some savings. We found, when you say savings, I'm sorry, maybe a clarification.
Well, were the estimates revised up or down to reflect what we consider the current bid environment, so that we now have a better number in terms of the total cost of the CIP? So, yes. I mean, at the end of the day, was the total difference X number of dollars? Do we know that? Could we provide that? Could we provide that? Because for me, I'm just be interested to see if that exercise paid off. So it's done, but we just didn't see the change.
Well, we saw the change. I didn't articulate it in this report.
We didn't see the change.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. So then the second question I have, so you could maybe follow up and give us that, yeah. Or it doesn't have to be whatever's the easiest, but I kind of like to know where that ended up, because it seems to me that we approved a CIP at a certain level. What's the new number? Is it more or less? I mean, that's really kind of why we wanted to go through the exercise. Then attachment 2, maybe you could help me understand, is this just an example of the process that you went through?
Attachment 2.
It's the one that lists, starts with Bright Area Road rehabilitation.
Right. So
And it
what
shows the difference, and then both the difference in the bids and in the contingency use.
So we looked at projects from 2009 that we've been working on.
Uh-huh.
This is an example of what you were talking about, but not a complete example of every project in the CIP, all, 200-something projects. This is an example of all the projects that we're working on in 2009. Not quite all of them, but most of the larger ones, the transportation projects in particular.
Right.
We went and evaluated each one and looked at what our original bid was, or what our original estimate was, what our bid was, came up with a number, and also contingency. So this is an example of the exercise that several different managers went through for their projects. In this particular case, this was our engineering manager that went through there and looked at their projects. So there are savings, and this is an
Yes,
example of.
and this would be the type of money that could potentially go into this capital reserve?
Yeah, we wanted to evaluate the concept, and we found actually there was some monies there.
Okay, good. Well, I've always known there's money in that contingency thing, but we just haven't seen it. Then the other question I have, it's more specific to the West Capitol Avenue streetscape. It shows here the total cost for that is 11.6 million. That's on page 15.
It's phase 2, yeah.
So, and that's why I wanted to clarify. So that's phase 2?
The estimate for phase 2 currently.
Okay, and so was this one revised? Because the attachment 2 shows West Capitol Streetscape came in 33% under an engineer's estimate. So I couldn't tell, that's one of the examples, I couldn't tell in here whether that one has been revised or not. And I guess it's important to me in the out years, when you're looking at the third year of the CIP, if we've got an item that's 11.6, that's a lot more money than an item that's, 8. And so I wanted to know if those numbers are adjusted to reflect what we currently think it's going to cost.
Yes,
So 11.6 is a new number.
I believe so, but I can check. A new number from the
From
last time
whatever
we
it
talked
used to be.
Yeah, I can have them check.
Okay.
I believe that it is.
Well, that's why I say, I
asked
just see
them-
the numbers here.
Yeah.
I can't tell whether that means this was adjusted or not adjusted.
Okay.
And in some of these out-year projects, it would change our priorities if we knew it was an $8 million project, because it's a third less potentially, it could move it up. And so that's why I think it's important to know in these out years on some of these projects what the costs are versus other potential priorities. You might want to not go with this particular project if it's almost $12 million, and you might go for 2 smaller projects, but if it was $8 million, maybe we could reach, and that's the kind of thing I'd like to know. Okay, thank you.
So in attachment 3, the capital reserve budget policy, is that an existing excerpt, or is that some new language that?
You're going to hear an item right after this, which is the capital, the draft budget policy.
Well, we're going to talk about the budget policy, but the precise language on the capital is very brief at this point, and it may be modified based on the conversation we get this evening.
Because it seems like it looks to me like that describes essentially what already happens. But because it does, it makes it clear the reserves can be appropriated as determined by the city council, but it's really the way by which we appropriate them. That's true, but insignificant, because we have to appropriate everything at one point or another for it to happen. It's how we do it. And so, if the funds go into a capital reserve for that fund, so, we have some significant savings in a sewer fund project goes into that fund, and, but only you know about it, right? We don't know. And so then 3 weeks later, you bring to us a staff report that says, asking us for authorization to release a bid to do some other sewer project. And in the fiscal section, you say, we're recommending you appropriate this money from the reserve in the sewer fund, and that reserve has this balance, right? And in your mind, in your spreadsheets, you have that sewer project as the next one on the list. but we didn't ever look at or approve a list. We only approved the projects that you asked us to fund. So in your example, you know, if you're in your example, you said you had enough money to fund 8 projects, and this would allow you to fund number 9. We only ever saw 1 through 8. And then anything that was 9 through 20 was just on a list of stuff that couldn't get funded at all. So we never ranked or prioritized those projects. So that's what I'm trying to get at is that we budget, not just that we appropriate, but that we actually look at from a budget perspective, the savings in a way that's more comprehensive than in a project way. So I know you get that. I don't think that this particular language quite gets to that. In terms of trying to assure that we have more of a role in trying to figure out what our priorities are. It becomes important because we have a lot of these big projects that are very important to us, the South River Road Bridge, Broadway Bridge, other ones that, part of the reason that they're getting deferred is that they're gigantic, right? And so if we appropriate the reserve, if we take all the reserves each time and we just appropriate them back out again, we'll never, we won't be able to accumulate if we wanted to. I'm not saying that we would, but I mean, the choice to accumulate lots of those resources to be able to take on some of those larger projects again won't be one that's open to us because we will have incrementally spent the money.
If I may, so what I'm understanding is that it's not only about the accumulation, but it's about the utilization, and it's that second piece that you'd like a little more articulated in the policy.
Yeah. So I'm not saying necessarily the money has to sit for the whole year, but at some point that if there's if we're talking $50,000-$60,000, that's not important. But there's for example, the West Cap Streetscape was $3 million under. When there's significant amounts of money in the reserve fund, and say you want to bring us the next project on what your list is, I at least want to see what more than just that one project is on what's the range of possibilities that we were unable to fund in the CIP, not just the next one on the list, because that doesn't give us the opportunity to make any priority setting. Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, I think, would that be reflected in the CIP to be moved? I mean, is that basically what we're talking about here? Because we've got basically savings of ongoing projects. We've made a decision not to fund some of these currently, so we've got a whole list of projects on the moved list that potentially those would be the ones we'd have the debate over, whether to bring those back in or not.
That could be one of the sources, yes.
Yeah,
exactly. All right. So you don't need any action from us, correct? Because we've already approved everything prior to this information. Correct?
Well, the only question I have is what's the true cost of the CIP now? If you've gone through and done an analysis and identified up and down, is the number the same as the last time we saw it?
No, it's actually different because of these adjustments that I'm talking about that I can go back and.
Well, when will we see those?
Next week.
Okay.
Next week, you'll see both the budget and the capital improvement program.
With the final numbers?
With the final numbers.
And then you're going to find out, at least if you can, on the streetscape, what's the out-year number on that specifically? You're going to verify what that is?
Whether or not the 11.6 is an adjusted number and
Right.
is an improved number, yes.
Okay.
And next week, when the CIP and the operating budget are presented to the council, I'll be here and I'll present the numbers to you and all the other data that we've talked about to date, and hopefully
Great.
it's all included. So.
Good.
Okay, great. All right, thank you, Mr. Panos. Item 13 is consideration of draft budget policy for fiscal year 2009-10 and 2010-11. Mr. Ross?
Yes, good evening. Next week, we intend to bring, as we said.
Oh, I did it again. I keep putting the card at different places in front of me so I don't miss it. All right, Ms. LaSalle, sorry about that.
All right, just a few questions. First one is a statement. I read some time ago that Sacramento doesn't have to have their meters hooked up till like 2024, and I was wondering if maybe we could get that type of deal going for us. Also, will the traffic calming be done in the Bright area during the fiscal year? I couldn't pull up any of the reports this time around. And are the tracks for the streetcar going to be installed on West Capitol, or are we just And at what point does that have to be done, or would we have to tear up everything that's been done to install them? And a suggestion is, since Bill was talking about the street sweeper little sign, I'm suggesting that they make a change to their schedule, because, for example, our street sweeper comes on Tuesday, our garbage is picked up on Wednesday, and now the street is filled with litter and stuff from the garbage, and so if they would come a day after or 2 days after, it would be clean. And it's probably going that way everywhere else too. So it's just something to think about. Thank you.
Sacramento does have a special legislative extension that we don't have, and I think that's the issue that Mr. Christoph is raising as to whether or not we might be able to pursue that on the water meters.
Because they're a charter city, right? Charter city.
Well, I thought it's because they went to the legislature and got a special extension, right? So we would have to do the same, which is what Mr. Christoph was raising. On the streetscape issues, the tracks will not be installed. The work is being done to the street, all the foundational work and everything underneath, so it will not have to be all ripped up. That part is being completed, but not the tracks themselves. And then the last question was on the schedule for the traffic calming.
No, for the street sweeper.
No, I'm sorry, the traffic calming and the Brighton traffic calming project.
The last time that we had a workshop with regards to the CIP, and I'm trying to remember from June 10th about traffic calming, is that there was, we were going to, and I don't know if it's specifically about the traffic calming that the citizen had just mentioned, but that there was, we had about 4 years of traffic calming. We hit all of the areas, even Bright Broderick areas that were of the high-risk areas. We felt pretty good about how much we've been able to do. There is more to do, but it's something that we could have, we can delay for a little while. That's based on all the folks that run the traffic calming program, and the engineers looked at it and said, hey, this is one, we had to select projects that we could delay. This was one because of Measure K funding and some other things that we were going to push off until such time that we had additional funding to do that, because we were running short. So I think I mentioned that in my last workshop, and so that was kind of where we are on that.
Okay. All right, thank you. Then item 13, the budget policy, Mr. Ross.
Thank you. So next week, we will bring back the budget and the capital improvement program. We've been accumulating over the last few weeks the responses from the council and adjusting our planning to that. You might appreciate that this year it's been much more complicated than it has in the past. Not only have we had more difficult issues in balancing the budget, but we've decided in the level of precision we needed to adjust the way we did it. And so there are a lot more mechanisms that we had to develop this year that we haven't used in the past. So in one sense, we have a much better budget process than we've ever had in the past, but it does take us a good deal of time to pull it all together. And that's why we've had this sequence of meetings with the council to get preliminary readings so that we can pull all that together, so that we can deliver to you a document that you could address and be prepared to act on. So one aspect of that is that we went back and examined our existing budget policy. This is an administrative policy. It's been developed over time. The staff report says it was developed over a couple of years. In fact, there have been changes in a number of years, including some major changes in 2002 and 2003. What we've done in the context of the current situation is re-examine those. And what's before you tonight is a staff report that starting on the first page of the staff reports lists 13 kind of major modifications to it. Then I delivered to you a memo that has some modifications to those modifications, and then attached is a red line version of the whole thing. What I'd like to do this evening is just discuss 5 of those because they are either more significant or require some explanation, but then be prepared to answer any questions and get any direction from the council that you'd like to provide. The first is in reference to the enterprise fund fees and rates, which is on page 2 of the resolution. It's number 3 on your list in the staff report, and it's number 3 in the memo. The point here is that we are somewhat redefining what is to be covered by fees and charges. I think this is a more traditional sense with an enterprise fund. You basically have to cover all those aspects of normal operations, maintenance and operation, plus you need to cover all the replacement and capital costs that are associated with the ongoing operation of a facility. And that's what we've added there. And then we've added a component there that says basically the fees and charges should be such to cover all of those costs. And if in the wisdom of the council you're uncomfortable charging those fees, that you'll identify another source of revenue so that those objects or those reasons for long-term operation are addressed. And so that point is reflected in the language that we're suggesting. I think it's consistent with philosophies that we've discussed over time, but it isn't actually articulated that way in the current budget policy, and so we've changed it. So that's the first of the 5 items.
Toby, but water will still stay in water, sewer will still stay in sewer.
Absolutely. The only difference here is that we make sure that all of the replacement of water lines, because they deteriorate over time, are covered by the fees and charges that we charge.
So this won't affect the $3 rate reduction that Measure K had given? Okay.
No, it won't. What it can do is put the council in a situation at some point when we come forward with say a new water master plan or something like that identifies X number of capital projects that are required, not because of new growth, but because the system has to be upgraded to continue operation. And that will translate into a rate implication. And so, one, we would ask you to adopt a rate that would do that. And if you can't, then we'd ask you to identify where we get the money to do that, if not through rates. So that's the essence of the policy that we're raising.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that one?
Yeah, now, staff would recommend other sources. I mean, it's not the council's going to come up with these different.
Oh, no, we're not going to try to box you in or you know, have it be a guessing game. No, we would come to you, we'd tell you what the implication is. It probably would start with the discussion of the master plan that implies the rates. Then we'd come back with the rates. At the time we tell you that it's going to represent a 15% increase in rates or something like that, you could then tell us, well, we'd like those rates escalated over a 5-year period. And so we'd come back with a rate structure that would do that. Or you'd say, you know, I can see us getting to 10%, but that last 5% we're not going to get. Come back to us with some suggestions of how we might do that. And we could come back with those suggestions, and you'd pick from the alternatives available to you.
So that discussion could include anticipated revenues?
Well, Oh, sure. If we could anticipate that there might be an established federal program for doing certain kind of work that we could apply for a grant, we could incorporate that.
Okay.
Any other questions on that one? The second one I want to talk about is the reserves and special purpose funds, and particularly, and that is on page 4 in the resolution, and it's number 5, I think, in the, let's see.
Revenue shortfall plan?
No, I'm sorry. It's the Reserves and Special Purpose Fund. It's the discussion with respect. It's number 5 on the list in the staff report, and it's on page 4 in the actual resolution. It's here we're talking about the notion that we would like, and I think the council hinted at this, that we would like to change our policy with respect to the general reserve to, instead of a range of 10 to 15%, a range of 10 to 20%, with a strategy to moving towards a 20% reserve. And so this policy suggests not only that that be the policy, but also that there be a strategy that would take 10% of any fund balance and assign it to augmenting that reserve. And so I wanted to highlight that policy as I think responding to a council's earlier concern. Questions? Okay. The revenue shortfall plan, a couple of things here. The memo provides a correction. We had a kind of a gap there. In fact, we're proposing that there be 4 measures, and the actions are correlated with that. The 4th measure would start at above 23% and apply to everything above 23%. So that'd be the first practical change. The other is that we're suggesting granting authority to the city manager to accelerate any of the actions if the specific criteria are not met, but there's a sense that those criteria will be met, either because of the anticipated problems or the duration that we feel that these current problems will represent, so that we could actually move farther down that list more quickly. And not just rely on the specific criteria. So those are the 2 components. It's been revised fairly substantially to compress it and to reflect circumstances that are more likely to occur in these times. And we've moved away from the idea of relating it to reserves, and we're relating it to revenues now. So I think it's a better measure of the times we're in. But that's the proposal there.
So this is a red line version, but the lists of actions are not, except in the crisis phase, are not repeated from the last version, are they?
They're additive, yeah.
Okay, so these are not, it's not that.
You wouldn't abandon the other alternatives. You'd add the new ones.
And what phase are we in now? Or what phase were we in 4 months ago?
Well, we were in the moderate phase. Very likely. I mean, we didn't have this policy at that time.
Right,
so
but I mean, we would have been.
We would have been in the moderate.
We weren't at 23%.
No.
Which I guess, I mean, the acceleration provision is helpful, but the caution, I think it's now the caution phase, right? Or in this latest red line version, mm-hmm. The caution phase is not robust enough to deal with. I mean, it would not have been robust enough to deal with what we have been contemplating over the last several months. I mean, it didn't, because it doesn't include a freeze. It includes a chill only. It's a lot of considering things, but virtually everything that's on the crisis phase list. Well, everything that's on the crisis phase list.
Everything we did.
We had to do in order to meet a shortfall that was well within the boundaries of the caution phase, and so I'm just worried that it's not aggressive enough in terms mm-hmm. of being and which will cause the problem to get worse over time.
And I think that's in part the reason we've added the provision to accelerate. This was a special set of circumstances that this isn't really designed to anticipate. If you look at, if next week you adopt the budget and the state comes in and takes $3 million from us, now we would be immediately back into one of these phases. If it's viewed as a one-time hit, we would respond pretty much the way it's outlined. If we see it as an ongoing problem, or it's actually becomes an ongoing problem, then we would accelerate and do the whole thing. But we can examine that and see if maybe we should shift the whole structure a little bit So it's a little bit more
I
conservative.
would seriously look at it because this sort of policy appropriately creates expectations. In fact, that's its whole purpose. And so, if we were to have our revenues drop by 20%, it's hard to imagine that happening and us not imposing a hiring freeze and reducing the temporary workforce and putting a hold on merit expenditures and all the things that are in the crisis phase.
Mm-hmm.
But it would not. But our policy would suggest something less, which would cause surprise once we started to implement those other provisions. And I think justifiably people say, you're just implementing scare tactics. Your own policy says that at a problem of this magnitude, this is the appropriate response, and you're overdoing it. So, this can't be. It's not an exact science, but it seems like it ought.
We can look at that.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Mayor Pro Tem Beers?
Yeah. The thing that I'd like, I understand these as all as budget actions, and I understand that that's the scope of this argument, but there's a correlation to what budget decisions are made in terms of delivery of services. And so I'm always concerned that when you're looking at budget issues that you don't look at just what's the easiest thing to cut, but you look at what's the implication to the service. And so somehow or other, I'd like to see some parallel discussion or how we prioritize for the delivery of services related to these cuts. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, and I think.
Well, it's just too many years of experience where the operating departments at the state are trying to deliver services, and the Department of Finance has a finite number that you get.
Yeah.
And then everybody tries to figure out what to do with the amount of money that they give you, which has no correlation to the delivery of services. And I don't want us to set up a process that's totally driven by a budget discussion without the advantage that we have as a community of relating that to services.
Right. I believe that the revenue shortfall policy is not really equipped to do that comprehensive evaluation, but the idea is that we do that in the context of the budget.
Exactly, and I think we just need to be sure that there's a place saver in the discussion that as you go through these, that there's also the discussion of implication of services, or what are your priorities for services.
Got it.
So that we don't just look at one issue. I mean, I think we're doing that now. I mean, I think we've had all those discussions. This just, to me, doesn't, if you follow it literally, it doesn't get you to, well, what's the implication to the delivery of services.
Okay.
And then, this is a minor thing, and I wouldn't even question that it would happen, but when you talk about additionally, the city manager can accelerate, which is your job. I mean, but it should also, just as a parenthetical statement, notice the council on the, so that it's just not, oh, by the way, I cut 9% out of your budget that you just approved 2 months ago, because I can accelerate.
Right. We can do that. We can certainly add the notice. I would do that. The next one is recovery. I just illustrate this. It's a philosophy that we hope that the council shares, but we'd like your assessment of that. And that is basically that in this circumstance where we have reduced by virtue of extra time off, imposed extra time off for most of the employees in the city, that we would look first to restore that as against providing raises. Now, this is all subject to collective bargaining, and there may be others who don't agree with it. We're really just expressing a policy preference here, not something that we can mandate. But that's essentially the point here.
Mr. Johannesson?
Yeah, maybe just to reiterate what Councilmember Beers was talking about on this as well. When we're looking at regrouping after a downturn, coming back into it, going into that, we're going to have a discussion of what this all means to the level of service. And so it's not necessarily the money that's cut, but, you know, there's going to be priorities of what's cut versus what is still being provided to the residents and that issue. So when we're going back into recovery, is how can we recover those services as well? So it's not just backfilling, but it's, you know, getting the services back going again. And they're probably going to correlate. You know, a salary decrease is probably going to mean some type of level of service decrease, which would probably have to be restored. But there should be something in here, I would think, that the consideration should be based on services and the economics of the situation.
Okay, I understand. The last point is, in the staff report, we basically asked that you suspend the use of growth and general fund growth. And what I've recommended in the memo I sent you today is that we actually eliminate it, because my own feeling is that when we get to a time where this sort of policy would be relevant, it will be a different time and circumstances, and I think the council at that point would want to establish probably a different set of priorities than would be reflected here. So suspension is probably not the right approach. Eliminating it at this point and then coming back when we see general fund growth and then revisiting that question at that point would be recommended.
So let me just ask on that, is it at the bottom of page 9 in the version that's in our books?
Right.
The bottom of page 9, that goes away. Is it all of page 10, all of page 11, all of page 12, and the top half, the first half of page 13 that would disappear?
It would stop at it would stop at 2/3 down on 13.
On 13, okay. All right, that's the final piece.
That's the final thing I was highlighting. Of course, the whole policy is there, most of which is correcting anachronisms or style.
Mayor Pro Tem Beers?
Yeah, Toby, this is just a minor. I just, on page 14, item G, I couldn't understand what it was saying, the corrected version. It says transfers of operation and maintenance expense accounts in the same shall be approved.
In the same, it's the same.
Oh, no, it's not to worry about.
Right, just make sure it's, that we dropped a word.
Yeah, that's what it looked like.
Okay.
All right, any further questions or comments? All right, this is not an item for council action, and the city manager has sufficient direction to proceed. All right, council calendar. Mr. Ross?
I don't believe we have any comments on the calendar.
Any questions on the calendar? City manager report?
Nothing this
City
evening.
attorney report?
Is there a meeting next week?
Yes, we do have a meeting next week.
We definitely have a
Next
meeting.
week and then the following week?
But no, not the following week.
Oh, no, just two. We've doubled up or something.
Staff direction from members of the council. And we have no future agenda item requests. And I don't have any more requests by Ms. LaSalle that I've forgotten.
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem Beers has moved, and Mr. Christoph has seconded. The meeting be adjourned. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.